Chapter 1084. To be honest, this kind of survival experience would have been better if you had a partner. When you walk alone, it's as if there's no one else in the world other than you. It's as empty as if you're the only person on Earth. Sometimes, it takes a lot of energy to suppress the negative thoughts. Seeing him, Yi Qian couldn't help but talk about her 15 days of survival training. Xia Jinyuan didn't interrupt her. He smiled warmly and quietly listened to every word she said. 15 days of wilderness survival training by himself not only honed his physical fitness, but more importantly, it also honed his psychological quality. She had suppressed it for too long and needed to be guided so that all the negative thoughts and stress would be resolved during the conversation. Eliminating the bad and leaving the best to achieve the effect of psychological training. She had just entered the entry level of psychological training. There would be more brutal training in the future, such as escape and resistance training, including escape, protective camouflage techniques, and resistance when captured. Xia Jinyuan's eyes were warmer than the sun and had the power to soften Yi Qian's heart. She was able to tell him all about the 15 days of psychological training. Little Fox, survival training in the wild was essential psychological training for a special forces soldier. This was to lay a good foundation for the brutal psychological training that was to come. Motivation, responsibility, maturity and stability, teamwork, intelligence, physical adaptability, trustworthiness, how strong one's psychological resistance was, how strong one's ability to escape. Yi Qian had to go through all of these. Sometimes, when I sit down, I don't dare to think too much. I'm afraid that I'll really get lost in the rainforest. So I just sit down and recite the creeds and beliefs of the special forces from different countries. At this point, Yi Qian's eyebrows curved slightly. Her bright black eyes revealed a hint of slyness. You don't say, it's really useful. These creeds and beliefs are powerful psychological weapons that the Special Forces soldiers use to resist negative thoughts during training. It's the same for me. But I think that if the Special Forces of other countries can do it, as a Special Forces soldier from China, how can I be worse than them? I have to do it. There's no why. Xia Jinyuan held her hand. Her combat gloves were worn out. She had endured 5 more days of survival training than the male soldiers. This was enough to shock the military. You've done a great job. You've completed the psychological construction of yourself in a very normal way. Yi Qian, everyone can see your excellence. Xia Jinyuan didn't point out her shortcomings. It wasn't time to point them out yet. He wanted her to finish what she wanted to say first. Right now, Yi Qian's training was only recorded in the military, but not all the details of her performance were recorded. Once she was admitted into the military academy, all her training would be systematized. Some of the key training would be even more detailed, such as her facial expressions and actions, and everything would be recorded clearly. He was 100% sure that Yi Qian would pass the test in terms of physical fitness, combat, marksmanship, endurance, perseverance, and camouflage. The focus was on her psychological training. Next, he would advise Uncle Qin to strengthen Yi Qian's psychological training. Yi Qian tilted her head and looked at the familiar and safe face. She touched her lips and smiled. I haven't spoken to anyone for almost 10 days. I'm very happy to see you. Very, very happy. I didn't have much to say at first, but when I saw Captain Xia, I didn't know why I couldn't help but say everything. I couldn't control myself. Chapter 1085. I am also very, very happy to be able to listen to your conversation with me. Listen, Yi Qian. You will be going through psychological training. We usually call it the survival diary of a loner. Considering that this is your first time surviving in the wild, we chose winter as the training time. Next year, we will arrange for you to go to summer. The goal is for you to train in harsh environments such as deep mountains, dense forests, and swamps to develop the psychological qualities that a special forces soldier should have. In my first year of military school, I skipped basic training and went straight into purgatory training. It took me a total of 3.5 years. Yi Qian, this is just the beginning for you. Her expression was no longer gloomy, and her smile was so bright that it touched his heart. At the right moment, Xia Jinyuan mentioned what kind of training she would have to undergo next. Yi Qian immediately understood that the training she was going through now was only at the entry level. When he heard Xia Jinyuan say that he skipped basic training and went straight into purgatory training that lasted 3.5 years, Yi Qian couldn't help but gasp. No wonder he was so powerful when he was only 20 years old. No wonder he became a major right after graduation. No wonder, he said that while she was working hard, he was also working hard. No wonder when she said she set him as her goal, he gave her a meaningful smile. It turned out that he had gone so far, so fast. I went through a total of 4 rounds of psychological training in the wild. The first round was in the deep mountains and forests in the summer, where there were all kinds of venomous snakes and ferocious beasts. The second round was in the desert, where the sun was so hot that I almost got heatstroke. The second round was in a world of ice and snow, where my hands and feet felt like popsicles. The third round was when I was captured. Every round lasted 5 days and nights, and I only finished when I passed. Hearing Yi Qian's serious expression, she had a question. You lasted 5 days and nights. Why did I last 15 days and nights? That was the question. The basic training for male soldiers lasts 10 days. You have 5 days more than the male soldiers. Like our comrades in the team, all of them have 15 days. This sentence was equivalent to hinting at Yi Qian's plans. Yi Qian's eyes flickered, as if he understood something. It's good that you understand. Now, I'll have to wait for the military's opinion on what to do. Blinking his eyes at her, the iron-blooded and gentle handsome Special Forces soldier suddenly became childish. His thin lips moved closer to her ear, and he chuckled softly, "Secret, our secret, no one can tell." Yi Qian was so close that his breath tickled her ears. She tilted her head unnaturally and said, thinking about it, "I'm really looking forward to it." "I'm also looking forward to it. You already have actual combat experience with us, so your mental stability is already quite outstanding. However, since you've been fighting with us since the beginning, you've missed out on basic training. It's inevitable that your emotions would fluctuate greatly when you see your comrades sacrificing themselves." She only talked about her 15-day mental journey, but avoided talking about the fight with the drug dealers. He learned from Su Yu that a martyr had met Yi Qian once. She even used the last bullet in her sniper rifle to send the martyr off. When he heard this, his heart suddenly skipped a beat. In the previous few battles, his little fox had never seen a comrade she knew sacrificing himself. This was no small matter. He shouldn't have been here, but he quickly wrote an application and rushed over as soon as the application was approved. Based on his understanding of her, she wouldn't say these things out loud. She would only keep it in her heart. And this was what he was afraid of. Chapter 1086. No matter how strong and resilient she was before, when faced with the sacrifice of a comrade she knew in the same battle, this huge impact was not just a single impact, but multiple. In the army, after every battle, there would be a psychological specialist to guide the soldiers who were on the battlefield for the first time, so as not to leave them with an irreparable psychological trauma. Yi Qian had already participated in actual combat, but she had never faced the sacrifice of a comrade she knew. If she really did not mention it, Xia Jinyuan would not be reassured, but would be even more worried. Now, when the haze between her eyebrows faded, he mentioned the sacrifice of a comrade so that she would no longer suppress herself. She would be in her healthiest, most determined state, and use her own perseverance to overcome the multiple impacts of her comrade's sacrifice. She must not leave a trauma, she must face it head-on. Xia Jinyuan's gaze fell on Yi Qian's face like the warm sunshine after a snowstorm. His gentle and handsome face did not change at all when he mentioned the sacrifice of a comrade. However, there was a faint coldness in his voice that directly cut into Yi Qian's bloody memories that she did not want to recall for the time being. Yi Qian's pupils constricted slightly. She pursed her lips and looked coldly at the man who never allowed her to escape. After a while, she smiled bitterly and said, "Captain Xia, I need a little more time. The people I know, who were smiling and talking to me shyly in the afternoon, will be forever separated when we meet again in the afternoon. I always thought that I had participated in actual combat and had faced death directly. I even thought that my attitude towards death was calm. But when I see my comrades fall, my heart..." Yi Qian slowly stopped and let out a long sigh. Then, she said softly, "There's an indescribable feeling. Discomfort, anger, tears. All of these piled up together. I don't know where to start. I also want to say it, but the more I want to say it, the more I don't know where to start. I understand that as long as I wear a military uniform, there will be sacrifices everywhere. The next one is very likely to be you. Captain Xia, I understand, but no matter how much I understand, I still feel sad." Xia Jinyuan put his hands on her shoulders and said in a low and cold voice, "Look at me, Yi Qian. Raise your head and look at me with your eyes. Look at me and listen to me carefully." There was a soft spot in her heart that belonged to her comrades. Yi Qian was not afraid of sacrificing herself, but she was not willing to see her comrades sacrifice themselves. What is the meaning of sacrifice? It's about protecting, using one's own life to protect our homeland, using one's own life to defend the peace of our country. You saw his sacrifice, but you must also remember why he sacrificed himself. That's because sin exists. There are too many evils in this world, too many wars, too much harm, and our existence is to use our lives to wipe out the evils that harm our country. If one day I sacrifice myself, Yi Qian, the gun in your hand, the bullets you shoot, every evil that you hit is the best sacrifice to the martyrs. You feel sad for your comrade who sacrificed himself, not because you aren't strong enough, but because you are a living person, a person of flesh, blood, and thoughts. Anger, sadness, tears, and sadness are all emotions that you are born with, and it's impossible to completely remove them. Chapter 1087. But you have to find another way to deal with these emotions that affect our judgment. Anger can be turned into radicalization, sadness can be turned into motivation, tears can be turned into fearlessness, and sadness can be turned into bravery. All sacrifices are the motivation for us to radicalize. Inherit the fearlessness, bravery, and fearlessness of the martyrs, and use the guns in your hands to continue protecting our country. This is the best way for you to pay tribute to the martyrs. When faced with cruel things, you can only face them, and you have to face them seriously. I'll say it again, Yi Qian, if one day I sacrifice myself, or you sacrifice yourself, every evil that is hit by a bullet from a living person's gun is the best way to pay tribute to the martyrs. These words were like a huge bomb thrown into Yi Qian's heart. The impact of the explosion fiercely squeezed his soul, shattering it into pieces. Under his cold voice, the shattered pieces of his soul were pieced back together piece by piece, piecing together a complete Yi Qian who had been reborn from the gunfire. The best way to pay tribute to the martyrs was to pick up the gun in your hand and shoot every evil that was hit by a bullet. This was the best way to pay tribute to the martyrs. Yi Qian took a deep breath. She was originally a quick-witted person with a strong ability to accept things. She also had a strong soul that had experienced many hardships. After being awakened by Xia Jinyuan's words, she quickly walked out of the bloody memory that she didn't want to recall. If it were any other time, you would have been able to walk out of it without my persuasion. 15 days of outdoor survival training is a challenge to your mental and physical limits. Walking alone in a rainforest where you feel like you're the only one in the world has already affected your mental state to a certain extent. It's normal for someone like you, who has never experienced anything like this, to find it difficult to accept the sacrifice of your comrades. We've also experienced sacrifice. 10 people went out and 9 came back. I locked myself in my room for 2 days and didn't come out of it. G3 plunged into the training ground and after 24 hours of self-harm training, he collapsed due to exhaustion. J5 memorized military rules for an entire day. Han Zhang hung himself on a tree. In the end, the entire team was alarmed and thought that he had been taken away by a tiger in the mountains. We all had the same emotions as you, but at that time, we were already past the age of psychological counseling. One by one, we resolved the stress in our hearts. 2 days later, we packed up and came out looking normal again. Yi Qian's current performance was already very good. In the face of sacrifice, she didn't show any negative emotions like fear or cowardice, which were the most taboo as a special forces soldier. She only felt sad and sad. These were normal emotions for her to sacrifice for her comrades. It was already very good for her. Captain Xia, Yi Qian, Yi Qian, Yi Qian with it, Yi Qian. In the end, Yi Qian wiped away the layer of gray accumulated on her soul. The haze between her brows also disappeared under the sunlight. She raised her head slightly and looked at the stalwart soldier standing in the light. She smiled faintly and said, at the same time, "You've shown me once again how strong the goal I've been chasing is. Thank you, Captain Xia. Thank you for always appearing in front of me immediately and helping me solve difficult problems that I couldn't figure out in such a short time." Seeing that she had once again defeated herself, Xia Jinyuan smiled slowly and leaned over to kiss her forehead. "Yi Qian, you're my pride. You're the best female soldier in my heart. I'm proud of you." Chapter 1088. Xia Jinyuan didn't just praise Yi Qian. When he praised her, he gave her pointers. Sometimes, he would even criticize her sharply. When his warm lips moved away from her forehead, Yi Qian stared at him intently, waiting for him to criticize her for the shortcomings of her field training. She was also very happy to hear his criticism. Xia Jinyuan had said everything that needed to be said. If there were still things that she couldn't figure out, she could only rely on herself to figure them out. Not everything needed someone to find a breakthrough for you, and not all psychological obstacles would be solved by someone. This time, it was only because it was the first time she had sacrificed herself in front of a comrade she knew. That was why he had rushed over. This was the only time, and there wouldn't be a next time. Seeing that she was still waiting for him to say something, Xia Jinyuan smiled and said, "Let's go and rest downstairs. An armored unit has just finished their winter training. The Major General is also there. He knew that you were training in the wild and specially waited for you to come back. There are some things that he wants to ask you personally." Without saying anything else, he took the lead and strode towards the camp where the troops were resting. "Hurry up. The 15 days of survival training are over. There are still so many days of vacation left. You can learn new things from the armored unit. The survival training can come to an end for the time being." The low and handsome voice drifted over along with the wind in the mountains. Yi Qian jogged over, her clear eyes shining like obsidian under the sunlight. "Armored unit? How many armored vehicles are there? How many days will they stay here? How will I enter the armored unit? Will the Major General agree?" She used the gun in her hand and every bullet she fired to pay tribute to the martyrs who sacrificed themselves. She thought that she would continue to pay tribute to the heroic souls who sacrificed themselves for this country without hesitation. Yi Qian took a deep breath and buried the bloody memories deep in her mind. She used the bloody memories to spur herself on. If one day she wore the military uniform, even if it was stained with blood, she wouldn't be afraid. The meaning of sacrifice was to pass on the legacy. It was the martyrs who used their brave and fearless blood to tell the generations of soldiers that they were not afraid of sacrifice. They were to face it bravely and fight for the country and the people. Faced with her questions one after another, Xia Jinyuan, who was wearing a jungle camouflage suit, turned around. His handsome face under the QGF-02 Kevlar helmet suddenly revealed a charming smile without any warning. His sexy thin lips curved into the sexiest curve. You'll understand all the questions after you see them. However, you still need to work hard. The Major General admires you very much, little fox. Whether or not you can learn from the armored soldiers in your last week's holiday depends on how you convince the Major General. Opportunities had always been fought for by oneself. He didn't stay here for long. He would leave by helicopter at 3:30 in the afternoon. Seeing that she was safe and sound, and that she had heard his words and remembered them in her heart, he would have to figure out the rest by himself. Yi Qian's footsteps became lighter. When she climbed over a small hill, Yi Qian was stunned by the scene in front of her. The armored unit had terrifying lethality, attack power, and destructive power on the battlefield. They could even attack several times in one round. This unit, which was composed of armored vehicles and soldiers, could be said to be a unit that represented military strength. At the foot of the hill, tanks, IFVs, armored reconnaissance vehicles, armored transport vehicles, all kinds of armored self-propelled weapons were parked neatly. The scene was so shocking that it made people stop breathing. Chapter 1089. What do you think? Do you have the urge to understand everything? Xia Jinyuan saw that she had stopped in her tracks and was staring intently at the rows of armored vehicles. Her eyes were as bright as the light, and he couldn't help but reach out and gently pinch her cheeks. The armored forces are on the front line of fierce battles. Go take a look inside the tanks, the IFVs, and the reconnaissance vehicles. It'll be good for you. Another year had passed. Yi Jian was growing up, and the young Major Xia had also become more mature. The elegance in his gestures was no longer as oppressive as before. Instead, he had become more reserved and deep. When he looked at others, his deep black eyes, which were filled with ferocity during battle, were filled with an invisible majesty. There was also a darkness that no one could understand. It was deep and dark, sometimes benevolent and sometimes cold. And when these unreadable eyes looked at Yi Qian, there was only a simple understanding. Yi Qian could see it clearly. The look in his eyes was telling her that he supported her, just like before. I'll give it a try. Yi Qian nodded. She winked slyly and smiled brightly. You've already reminded me. How can I miss such a good opportunity? Xia Jinyuan nodded. You're worth teaching. If there's no chance, we have to create one. Now that there's an opportunity, how can we miss it? I'll support you in convincing the Major General to stay with the armored forces for a week. After speaking, the two of them looked at each other and smiled. There was a kind of telepathy in their smiles that reverberated back and forth in their hearts. When the strong worked together, no matter how difficult the problem was, it would not be difficult. The Major General and Uncle Chin chatted happily. You've trained her to be very outstanding, and our military needs excellent soldiers like her. She's only 18 years old. The military is looking forward to her enrolling in the military academy as soon as possible so that she can contribute to the war. Let me tell you something. Since Yi Qian has an extraordinary memory, the military intends to train her to be an all-rounder. As long as she enrolls in the military academy this year, we'll immediately call her to the military after the results are out and begin systematic training. Your 4-year plan is quite good. It allows the military to skip a lot of basics when training Yi Qian. When I return, I will discuss with the military headquarters to create a more comprehensive and intensive training program for Yi Qian. When the time comes, I will also tell you this plan for your reference. He was the soldier king of the 1970s, a soldier king who spoke with his strength. His opinion was very important. Uncle Chen had always known that the military was paying attention to Yi Qian, but he did not know that it was to this extent. A customized training plan. Who else would be so special? Apart from Miss Jian, it would be difficult to find a second person. The military values Yi Qian so highly because of her own efforts. I've already taught her everything I can. My past has already become history, and I've already fallen behind in all aspects. Now that we've gone through digital and information-based high-tech battles, my method is already outdated and can't keep up with the changes in our country's military. After I finish teaching her for the remaining 6 months, I'll hand Yi Qian over to the military so that the military can train her to the next level. Uncle Chen was telling the truth. He did not know much about high-tech weapons. Only if Yi Qian joined the military would she be able to learn more and know more. With the Major General's words, Uncle Chen was even more relieved. The little girl that he and Uncle Jen had trained together was finally going to leave them. She was going to spread her wings and fly to a higher and wider sky. Chapter 1090. But the Major General denied it and said seriously, "Without you, I am certain that Yi Qian would not be where she is today. It is a tragedy to have a fine horse but not have a talent scout. But to have a talent scout who knows a fine horse is a good thing. You have a good eye for talent and use your unique method to train Yi Qian until she is only one step away from becoming a special forces soldier. Old Chin, you are a role model for all of us generals to learn from." The guard outside the tent said, reporting. The Major General replied, "Come in." Then he saw 2 figures walking in together. The man was tall and slender with elegant features, while the woman was slender and beautiful. They wore the same forest camouflage uniform as they walked over. One represented the male soldiers, while the other represented the female soldiers. Both of them could represent the entire military and be used for recruitment propaganda. Come, sit. When the Major General saw Yi Qian, he stood up and personally walked over to greet her. "You seem to be in good spirits. Surviving alone for 15 days. Yi Qian, good job." Uncle Chen was looking kindly at Yi Qian, his smile full of gratification. The little girl of the past had finally grown up. She was slim and graceful like a girl, but also had the temperament of a soldier. Her back was straight, and her expression was confident and reserved. When she spoke to the major, she was calm and confident. She had grown up. She had grown up. She had grown up into an adult. The atmosphere in the command tent was very harmonious. From time to time, loud laughter could be heard. The Major General gave an objective evaluation of Yi Qian's performance during the survival training. He said, "Based on your current performance, you have completely met the requirements of the training. You have overcome your fear on your own and helped the border police to complete their mission successfully. The military is extremely satisfied with your outstanding performance. At the same time, I hope that you will continue to work hard and live up to Old Chen's training." Yi Qian was indifferent to the evaluation and praise of her superior. She did not have a trace of pride because she believed that everything she did was what she should be doing. There was nothing to be proud of. "Major General, speaking of training, there is another opportunity for Yi Qian to train. What do you think?" He was a man who was good at finding the right opportunity to make appropriate suggestions. He brought up the topic very naturally. Major Xia looked at Yi Qian with a serious expression. "Why don't you ask the Major General?" Yi Qian was still thinking about how to bring it up. As soon as he opened his mouth, he immediately asked with a very serious expression, "Major General, I happen to have a week of leave. When I saw the armored vehicle just now, I was wondering if I could stay in the army and learn more about these self-propelled weapons that are very powerful on the battlefield." After the idea was put forward, Uncle Chin looked at the Major General quietly. This was a good idea. He was also thinking about it. "Major Xia gave you an idea? Or did you think of it yourself?" The Major General, who did not immediately agree, looked at the serious young major with a faint smile. Then he smiled and asked Yi Qian, "Why do I feel like we've discussed this outside?" "We did discuss it." Two voices sounded at the same time. One was Xia Jinyuan, and the other was Yi Qian. Their voices were loud and clear as they answered in unison. The Major General pointed his finger in front of each of their eyes. "It's a bold idea, but it's quite practical. 1 week is fine, but I'm afraid you won't be able to learn anything. You can try to understand it." He managed to convince Yi Qian to stay with just one sentence. Xia Jinyuan let out a long sigh. "Major General, you should have at least objected. You agreed so quickly that I didn't even have a chance to perform." Chapter 1091. Who are you trying to impress? The Major General glanced at the major who gave him a headache but was also the most outstanding major. He raised his hand to look at the time and said, "You can set off now. You don't have to come here personally if there are any urgent matters in the future. As the leader, you have full authority to deal with them as long as they don't violate the rules." No matter how anxious Xia Jinyuan was to find Yi Jian, he could not leave the team because of personal matters. He and the pigeons were conducting special training for a company under them. There were some things that he could not overstep his authority, so he had to ask the Major General for permission before rushing over. He would only stay for half a day. He arrived at 8 in the morning and left at 4 in the afternoon. He originally planned to leave at 4 in the afternoon, but the Major General asked him to leave before 4 in the afternoon. A soldier's duty was to obey orders. Xia Jinyuan saluted the Major General and said, "Yes, sir." A simple, "Yes, sir." Without any superfluous words, he immediately agreed to carry out the order. He then said to Principal Chin, "Uncle Chin, I'll come and see you when I have time off." He only nodded and smiled at Yi Qian and strode out of the command tent. The youngest major in the team, Yi Qian, you've all worked together before. He's a very outstanding soldier. If there's a chance in the future, Yi Qian, you can ask him for advice. The Major General waited for Xia Jinyuan to leave before praising his soldiers. Then he said to Principal Chin, "Old Chin, let Yi Qian stay with me. You can leave with Major Xia in a helicopter later. Leave her in my hands. Don't worry. The jade has been polished, and I will polish it even more. I won't let your efforts go to waste." Headmaster Chin was more than happy to train with the army, especially in the armored forces. He quickly said, "The army is the place where I feel most at ease. I trained her so that she can serve the country and the people. Now that she can train with the armored forces, it's also because the military thinks highly of her." The Major General did not deny this point. He nodded in front of Yi Qian and said, "That is indeed the case. As long as she can get into any military academy in our country, we will immediately start 3.5 years of intensive training. Oh right, the same goes for Major Xia. After he gets into the military academy, he will immediately start 3.5 years of intensive training. Yi Qian will also do the same. Hearing this, no matter how calm Yi Qian was, he could not help but feel his emotions fluctuate. He could not control himself. Going through the same 3.5 years of intensive training as Captain Xia was a great opportunity. Then he heard the Major General say, "Since you're here, get used to it. We armored soldiers don't just drive armored vehicles. We need to know more." 7 days is a short time, but I hope you can gain something here. Faintly, Yi Qian felt that something was not quite right. It was as if he was hinting at something. As a newcomer, even if there was a hint, she would not be able to figure it out without understanding it. However, since she had this feeling, it would be good to keep it in mind. The Major General looked at her with a thoughtful look in his eyes, and the smile on his face deepened. A good seedling was indeed different. She could immediately detect something unusual in a seemingly unintentional sentence. Just from such a small matter, she could see that Yi Qian was very attentive. In the afternoon, Principal Chen and Xia Jinyuan left together. Yi Qian only walked them to a place that was a short distance away from the helicopter. Hearing the sound of the propeller not far away, he said to Xia Jinyuan, "This year, my wish will come true. Captain Xia, I am one big step closer to my goal." Chapter 1092. That's right, and I will personally deliver the military uniform to you. Xia Jinyuan adjusted the helmet for her. Study hard for a week. 6 hours of sleep out of the 24 hours is enough. Set aside the rest of the time. Yi Qian's lips curved into a smile. I was planning to only sleep for 4 hours. Silly girl, they have 6 hours of rest. Are you going to take 2 more hours to stand guard for them? He patted her shoulder and looked over her head to the 2 armored reconnaissance vehicles. He chuckled and said, "The self-propelled weapons of this armored unit are not bad. That armored reconnaissance vehicle is much more fun. Let's go check it out." Special Forces soldiers don't just know how to drive vehicles. You also need to know how to use tanks and fighter jets. For example, the Snowfield Brigade sometimes had to work with test pilots to fly the new fighter jets they developed. Yi Qian had a lot to learn in the 3.5 years. The Special Forces soldiers carried out special missions. Most of the time, they fought behind enemy lines or fought alone. The more they knew, the more protection they would have in future battles. If one day they needed to escape, even if there was a tank or fighter jet in front of them, they would have to know how to use it. After 15 days of survival in the wild, Yi Qian suffered from external injuries, fever, lost her way, and bee stings. After resting for less than 4 hours at her destination, she was ready for the next round of training in the blink of an eye. There was also the joy of the Spring Festival in the army. The Major General knew that Yi Qian had spent the Lunar New Year's Eve alone in the rainforest, so he specially ordered the cooks to make dumplings for Yi Qian as a way of consoling her. After consoling her mentally during the day, he came to settle things at night. That night, Yi Qian was sleeping soundly. Suddenly, someone snuck into her tent to assassinate her. Outside, someone was destroying the armored vehicles. Yi Qian knew that even if she only had 7 days to study, her days would be rich and colorful. Yi Qian took note of the Major General's words. When 2 people snuck into her tent, Yi Qian's first reaction was to lift the thin blanket covering her body and throw it at the shadow on her right. This was the army. The dark shadows that had snuck in were none other than the soldiers who had acted as assassins. Our armored soldiers don't just drive armored vehicles. They need to know more than that. Yi Qian understood the deeper meaning of this sentence. This time, Yi Qian wasn't frightened. Instead, she scared the soldiers who had sneaked in. She couldn't help but shout when she kicked. The woman's clear voice stunned the 2 soldiers who had sneaked in. Woman. Did he sneak into a family member's room? That's not right. Where did the family room come from? They were all out training. Where did the family room come from? Originally, they did not use much of their real skills, but when the two male soldiers heard that the voice belonged to a woman, they really thought that someone had sneaked in. Regardless of whether there was a problem or not, they had to capture the person first. Fist against fist, foot against foot, the tent was filled with the dull sound of flesh being struck. Outside, the Major General said to a company commander surnamed Swa from the armored forces, "Guess how long it will take for this to end? The two soldiers you sent here are very good at fighting. One of them can take on several people. Since it's a female soldier inside, and it's 1 against 2, I think it won't take more than 5 minutes." Company Commander Swa thought that he was being conservative. If he really wanted to say it, they should be able to take down the enemy in about 3 minutes. Chapter 1093. The Major General smiled meaningfully. That's not necessarily true. It's impossible for your 2 men to overpower her in 10 minutes, but she can overpower one of your soldiers in 10 minutes. The Soldier King had spent 4 years training the special forces. How could one soldier overpower them? That's not possible. Female soldiers are weaker than male soldiers in terms of physical fitness. Those 2 soldiers. Before he could finish, he heard a girl's voice say, "You've lost." Left Company Commander. How embarrassing. What a disgrace to his grandmother's home. So fast. The Major General was a little surprised. He had said that one soldier would be overpowered in 10 minutes. Now, it had only been 5 minutes and both soldiers had been overpowered. It was so fast that he couldn't accept it so quickly. The male soldiers of the armored forces shouldn't have been overpowered by Yi Qian in 5 minutes. If Principal Qin was here, he would think that Yi Qian could have sped up the time even more. After 4 years of rigorous training, overpowering the enemy in the shortest amount of time was more advantageous for oneself. If you shortened 5 minutes to 4 minutes, you would still have 1 minute to support your comrades or by 1 more minute for the entire force's fighter jets. The 2 male soldiers were a little dejected when they came out. When they saw their company commander's face, which was already dark, turned as dark as coal. Beautifully overpowered, overpowering 2 in 5 minutes. Good job. The Major General had always admired Yi Qian. Now that he could see her ability face to face, his appreciation for talent deepened. They're 2 of the best soldiers in Left Company Commander's company. I didn't expect them to make our company commander so angry. Left Company Commander only felt embarrassed. He couldn't even beat a female soldier. If word got out, he would be treated as a joke by other companies. Yi Qian said, "They're very good. It's just that I'm a woman and they were frightened by my sudden noise. Secondly, I have a weapon in my hand. It's very advantageous to fight in the dark. That's why I won. A loss is a loss. There's no need to make excuses." Left Company Commander shook his head and turned to stare at his 2 soldiers. He said in a low voice, "What do you think? We're not as good as them. There's no excuse. If you lose, you have to admit defeat." The 2 male soldiers admitted it straightforwardly. The result was right in front of their eyes. They had lost. There was no reason for it. You have to admit it. I'm going to run 5 kilometers. After that, I'm going to sleep. His attitude of admitting his mistake was pretty good. Fortunately, he didn't embarrass himself with his attitude. The Left Company Commander's mood improved slightly. His gaze fell on Yi Qian's face. He was full of questions. The Major General didn't stop the Left Company Commander's order. After the 2 male soldiers left, he said, "Don't underestimate Yi Qian. I'd be surprised if she didn't have some skills. It's not strange for you two soldiers to lose. After all, armored infantry is different from her. Don't feel embarrassed. How can you not lose against the special forces? Hearing this, the left company commander almost bit off his own tongue. It was already shocking enough that two male soldiers couldn't beat a female soldier, and now there was another, two male soldiers going up against a female soldier from the special forces. It seemed that there was nothing embarrassing about losing. Also, there were no female special forces soldiers in their company. From the Marine Corps. It didn't look like it. She was also wearing army camouflage. It couldn't be the Marine Corps. A female soldier from the amphibious reconnaissance team. When the left company commander left, he still saw the major general whispering something to the female soldier from the special forces. From time to time, he would raise his hand to point at the armored vehicle, as if he was introducing something. Chapter 1094. The Major General was a Major General in the Army. He came from the armored forces and was very familiar with armored vehicles. Sometimes, he could even participate in the technical guidance and maintenance of armored vehicles. It was no wonder that Xia Jinyuan said that this armored troop was one of the most powerful troops. Since the leading general could be so hardworking and take the lead, the officers and soldiers at the grassroots level would naturally follow the lead of the general. For the next 7 days, not only did the Major General personally guide Yi Qian, but he also personally drove the tank and explained the different types of tanks. Tanks with automatic loaders did not have loaders. They only needed a commander, a gunner, and a driver. The commander commands the entire vehicle in battle and is responsible for communications. The gunner is responsible for operating the cannons. The driver's job is a little more monotonous. The commander is responsible for driving. If we don't have an automatic loader, we will need another loader. For many years, there has been a lot of discussion about manual loaders and automatic loaders. Our country has manual loaders and automatic loaders. There is a problem with automatic loaders. Countries like the United States and other Western countries generally do not use automatic loaders. In terms of technical reliability, the main reason is that they have doubts about the reliability of the autoloader. Once the autoloader malfunctions, the disaster brought about by the war will be so great that it can affect the outcome of the battle. Our tank can reach a maximum speed of 65 km per hour, climb a maximum of 31 degrees, and wade 1.4 meters deep. It mainly uses armor-piercing shells and anti-personnel grenades. Look here. The Major General began to explain the operation of the tank. He explained everything to Yi Qian, from the commander to the gunner. The armored soldiers could have explained this kind of introduction to Yi Qian in detail. However, the Major General wanted to do it himself because he wanted to understand how capable Yi Qian was in these 7 days. She was quite satisfied with her performance on the first night. Yesterday, she had followed the armored soldiers to the artillery field. One of the tanks had a problem with its track. She did not say anything and carried the heavy equipment with the male soldiers. She did not show any signs of being tired. Last night, Commander Zhua had secretly said to him, "Major General, the female Special Forces soldier you're talking about can't be a woman, right? That ruthlessness to herself, even I feel scared when I see it." She was even more ruthless than the male soldiers and was more like a soldier than the male soldiers. Such female soldiers were like gold in any army. Wherever they went, they would shine. Yi Qian, who was sitting in the driver's seat, didn't even wipe the sweat from the corners of his eyes. He stared intently at the Major General as he explained the equipment in the tank and the main functions of each instrument. The tank had a ventilation system. Although it was always on, sitting in a sealed space for a long time would cause one to sweat profusely. They were riding in a self-loading tank. The Major General carefully explained to Yi Qian the different types of self-loading. It was obviously difficult to understand, but Yi Qian listened with great interest. The Major General had been paying attention to Yi Qian's expression all this time. He had purposely come over in the middle of the day to instruct Yi Qian because he wanted to see how strong Yi Qian's perseverance was. The more he observed, the more satisfied the Major General was. He was even more impressed by the Soldier King's sharp eyes. If it weren't for his sharp eyes, based on the military's investigation of Yi Qian's family, it was very likely that such a talented person would be buried in the crowd instead of serving the country. Chapter 1095. The main components of a fixed-angle automatic loader are usually placed in the turret. The cannon must be locked at a specific angle before it can be loaded. It has a shortcoming, which is that every time it is reloaded, the cannon must be reset to its original position. Even the observation equipment must be reset. It can be said that although the fixed-angle automatic loader increases the firing rate, it also limits the combat effectiveness of the tank. Our military rarely has this type of tank. It is either manually loaded or non-fixed-angle loader. Yi Qian smiled and said, "I understand. The tank I sat in yesterday was a non-fixed-angle loader because I saw that it was a semi-automatic loader. The reloading and unloading were done manually. It is different from the fixed-angle automatic loader that you mentioned. You are very observant." The Major General smiled approvingly and said, "That's right. Our armored forces mainly use non-fixed-angle loader tanks and fully manual loader tanks. We have fixed-angle loaders, but they are very, very rare. Our country has countless military experts who have been improving the tank research. Just like the tank we are sitting in now, it may be put into production in the near future." In her previous life, Yi Qian did not pay attention to this area. If she did, she would know that China's fourth-generation Type 99 tank would be born soon. Once again, it would represent China's military strength taking a big step forward. As the main weapon of war, the tank could not stay in the same place. Even if the Type 99 tank was produced, China would not stop improving the tank. In order to become a big country, you must first be able to stand on the military side and make other countries fear you. From the Type 59 to the Type 79, and then to the Type 99 tank that would be released in 1999, it could be seen that China had been secretly improving the tank. In 7 days, Yi Qian had a certain understanding of the development of China's armored forces. From the main battle tank to the light tank, she had a certain understanding of the performance and operation of each type of armored vehicle. As long as the Major General asked her something, she could answer accurately. Just as Xia Jinyuan said, 7 days would not make her proficient, but at least she had a general idea in her mind. If there were similar opportunities or formal training in the future, at least she would not be ignorant. After all, armored vehicles were not the strength of the Special Forces. However, for the Special Forces of the Snowfield Brigade, they needed to understand the functions and usage of their country's weapons and equipment. They were a mysterious Special Forces team. Their mystery lay in the fact that there was nothing they couldn't solve, no weapon they couldn't use, and nothing they didn't know. The Snowfield Brigade was full of mystery and terror. Other than the important leaders of the military, no one else knew about its existence. They had no name, no organization, and no one knew where their base was. No one knew where they came from or where they were going. They were like ghosts carrying swords. Wherever they went, there would be blood, but no one knew where they were. Every country knew about the Delta Force, the Alpha Force, and the Green Berets, but the Chinese Snowfield Brigade was nowhere to be found. They could not be found. They could carry out anti-terrorist operations, and they could also carry out activities that were unfavorable to China abroad. They could also rush to the front line on the battlefield and fight for opportunities for the follow-up forces. The soldiers selected from such a force were all the best of the best. After a long period of strict training, they finally had the special forces of the Snowfield Brigade with unique skills and extraordinary skills. The Major General was the direct commander of this force, and because it was the first time he had recruited a Special Forces female soldier, he was very cautious. Chapter 1096. Since he had the chance to observe Yi Qian up close, the Major General used a harsh gaze to evaluate Yi Qian. From his language to his attitude, from his ability to his intelligence, and from his physical and mental qualities to his training, he needed to give an objective evaluation of Yi Qian within 7 days. Yi Qian did not know that he had been included in the evaluation, nor did he know that the reason why Xia Jinyuan asked him to let her stay in the armored division for a week was to bring her to the Major General and let him evaluate her personally instead of reporting to the Major General through him. There were some things that Xia Jinyuan could not mention to Yi Qian before he became a member of the Snowfield Brigade, nor could he explain everything to her. Everything would proceed according to her wishes. Step by step, she held Yi Qian's hand and walked into his world, a world that she could not imagine. What was the most beautiful love? Xia Jinyuan did not understand. The only thing he understood was holding her hand and accompanying her in the way she liked as she grew up. Every day for 7 days, the Major General personally wrote down his evaluation of Yi Qian's overall abilities. He did not let anyone else do it. After Yi Qian left, this evaluation would be sent to the military as a top-secret document. Yi Qian's departure made company commanders heave a sigh of relief. Yi Qian could carry cannons, carry guns, kill people, and save people. She also had the godly marksmanship of 100 spears piercing a leaf. This made him, the company commander, feel a lot of pressure. After Yi Qian boarded the plane, he could not bear to let him go. He said to the Major General, "Major General, if such a soldier were to be placed in our division, he would be able to arouse the competitive spirit of the male soldiers. Save me some trouble. Every time after training, I see Yi Qian stronger than your soldiers. She intimidates Mr. Bao's face and roars in the middle of the night. Fortunately, she has a good mentality. Otherwise, she would be scared away by you." The Major General watched the helicopter take off and fly out of the mountains. He then smiled at Commander Zhua. "I heard you roaring the entire spring festival. If you still want Yi Qian to be placed in the division, the commander will fall out with you." As he spoke, the Major General's expression turned cold. "Your training needs to be strengthened. I can understand that you can't beat her one by one. But I was so embarrassed that you didn't even notice that she had killed 4 sentries in the middle of the night." Although he was criticizing Yi Qian, he was very satisfied with his performance. With the Snowfield Brigade's abilities, it was normal for him to kill 4 sentries in one go. Commander Zhua straightened his back and saluted. "Roger." The story of a female soldier killing 4 whistlers spread throughout the army for a long time. Everyone wanted to know who the female soldier was, but no one knew who she was. Who would know who she was with that painted face of hers all day? The sun was shining brightly at the border, but the southern province was still cold. Yi Qian stepped on the snow and returned to her residential area. Uncle Chen knew she was coming back and had prepared dinner for her. She pushed open the door to her room with Spring Festival couplets and saw a white-haired old man walking slowly in the living room. "Grandpa Jen." Yi Qian's voice trembled in surprise. She threw her backpack to the ground and ran into the living room without even changing her shoes. "Grandpa Jen, why did you come all the way here? Why are you here?" Her voice trembled, and her eyes were red with tears. "It's been more than 10 hours. How can your body take it?" 4 years had passed, and Grandpa Jen was already 80 years old. His hair was all white. Although he was walking slowly, his back was still straight. No matter how much hardship he had gone through, this first-grade sergeant major still maintained the dignity of a soldier. Chapter 1097. Uncle Jen gently patted the back of her hand and smiled kindly. Your Uncle Chin brought me here. How can I be tired? You haven't come back to the village for 2 years. I was worried about you. Now that I see you, I'm relieved. You've grown up. You're a big girl now. The army thinks highly of you. No matter how far Yi Qian had gone, she was just a little girl growing up in Uncle Jen's heart. I've grown up. You're old too. Yi Qian's voice was a little choked. She helped the old man sit down on the wooden sofa and said softly, I haven't come back to see you for 2 years. I'm sorry for making you worry. Uncle Jen smiled and said, in order to not let you come back, I've talked so much. Don't you think it's good now? You're valued by the army, and I'm also valued by the army in the village. What does it matter if you don't come back? Little girl, we don't have much time in our lives. The longer we live, the fewer days we have to live. When it's time for you to learn new skills, you need to live every day seriously. If you come back to see me, it'll take you 3 days to go back and forth. I don't want you to waste 3 days just to see me. You haven't come back to see me for 2 years, but now you've achieved something that makes me happy. My child, you've been using your own methods to prove to me that you've been working hard. You've lived up to my expectations. That's good. That's good. When people get old, they understand how precious time is. The 80-year-old old man used his life's experience to educate the child he had watched grow up. He only hoped that she would grow up and live up to her time. Yi Qian secretly wiped away the tears that she couldn't hold back. She tightly held the old man's withered hand that didn't have much vitality left. She pursed her lips and showed a stubborn expression. She smiled faintly and said, I haven't come back to see you. I can only tell you with my own actions that I won't let you down. I won't let you down. Grandpa knows. Grandpa knows. You're a good child. You're Grandpa's pride. Uncle Jen had lost a lot of weight in the past 4 years, but he was still in good spirits. Although he spoke slowly, his words were clear and firm. Judging from his condition, the old man's body was still in good condition. When he saw Yi Qian wiping his tears, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. Look at you, child. I didn't see you shed a single tear after 15 days of intensive training. Why are you crying now? The old man had lived to this age, and had experienced the flames of war, so he was able to see through everything better than others. His witty yet insightful conversation soon made Yi Qian laugh heartily. She should be the one making the old man happy. Why was the old man making her happy instead? Knowing what the elderly liked to hear, Yi Qian picked the ones that he liked to hear. Snakes should be hibernating, but I met 2 pythons that were coiled around a tree. Those drought magnolia locusts were as thick as a pinky finger, and they stuck to their bodies. When they felt the pain, good fellow, I'm full. There are these in the mountains. It's much better than before. Back then, there were many tigers and wolves. When we crossed the mountains, we had to be tense. We didn't want to be eaten by the tigers before the battle even started. When they talked about Yi Qian's training, the smile on Uncle Jen's face deepened. This child looked cold, but he was kind-hearted. He even knew to pick the ones that he liked to hear. Chapter 1098. I went out to get some rice wine and little Miss Jian came home. Principal Chen's cheerful laughter came from outside the unlocked door. Little Miss Jian, drink with me and Uncle tonight and celebrate the spring festival together. Ever since Yi Qian graduated from junior high school, she had never celebrated the spring festival together. She used to train even during the first month of the year and only rushed back the day before school started. From the beginning of the year until the end of the year, training took up most of her time. The rice wine was mellow and the food was fragrant. Tonight was the day Yi Jian smiled the most and was the happiest. Saying something that hurt child Xia made her happier than when she was with him. Yi Qian didn't drink too much, not even one tael. She asked the two elders to persuade her to go to bed early. 22 days of continuous training was considered high-intensity training in any military unit. She needed to rest early. Yi Jian's mood was fluctuating when she came back. She drank some wine and chatted with her two closest relatives for 2 hours. Yi Jian, who was very happy, naturally listened to them obediently. After washing up, she really went to bed and fell asleep. After she fell asleep, Principal Chen poured a cup of warm rice wine for Uncle Jen in the living room. After touching the cup, he said, "In my opinion, you shouldn't talk about what you want to talk about for now. Why don't you talk about it after the college entrance exam? It's not long before the college entrance exam. Let her finish it in peace. The military is also waiting for her to pass the college entrance exam and officially enter the military. Uncle Jen, I'm afraid something will happen at this critical juncture. It's not worth it to affect Yi Qian's college entrance exam because of the Yi family's trivial matter." Uncle Jen took a sip of the wine and sighed. That old woman from the Yi family is going crazy. She allows her son-in-law to do whatever he wants. I'm afraid that he will cause trouble in school and little Miss Jian won't be on guard. There's something wrong with that old woman and her son-in-law. I don't understand why they want you to talk to Yi Qian and persuade her to meet with them. Also, I heard old woman mention a jade pendant that night. Why do I feel like it has something to do with little Miss Jian? There's one more thing I wanted to ask you that night. Since you knew that Sun Yaozu was a wanted criminal, why didn't you contact the police to arrest him directly? Now, he's become a big scourge. When Principal Chin went back to fetch Uncle Jen to the provincial capital, he bumped into old Madame Yi with her son-in-law and daughter. He wanted to stop them, but Uncle Jen persuaded him to go back to his room. For the sake of Yi Qian, he must not come out. He didn't show himself, but he heard a lot of things. One was about the jade pendant, and the other was about Sun Yaozu's wanted criminal, who went from being a fugitive to being innocent. After asking, the living room fell into silence. After a while, someone said, "It's something that can't be explained in a few words, but I do regret not telling the police." As for the jade pendant, Miss Jian actually knows about it. It can be considered as her mother's relic, but I advise her not to take it back. Principal Chen's hand that was holding the peanuts paused. I'm a little confused by your words. Since it's the relic of martyr Sun Xueqing, why would it become a scourge? After she got the jade pendant, she put it in a small box when she came back. She was gone and turned into powder. When he mentioned Yi Qian's mother, every wrinkle on old Master Zhen's face was serious. She also mentioned to me that if she were to sacrifice herself one day, it would be related to the jade pendant. Chapter 1099. Back then, Sun Dongqing and Yi Zhifan were the ones who received the jade pendant from Miss Ye's mother. I didn't know what happened back then, until one day, when Yi Zhifan was transferred to the town. After drinking, he said something incoherent. He roughly said that it was thanks to the jade pendant that he was where he was today. Coincidentally, the village chief, who I asked to take care of Miss Jian, overheard him. Uncle Jen didn't seem to be as spirited as he was when he was talking to Yi Qian. His voice was as bleak as the autumn leaves. I rushed back from the army and found out that the jade pendant was in Yi Zhifan's hands. After leaving the pendant, I saw Yi Zhifan rise from the town government to the deputy mayor. He held the position of deputy mayor for 3 years. After that, he was promoted faster and faster. He went from deputy mayor to mayor, then to city mayor, and now to the provincial office in just 4 years. As Yijifan climbed higher and higher, so did the owner of the jade pendant. That's why he had the power to promote a deputy mayor to a provincial office in just 4 years. Uncle Jen had been paying attention to Yijifan's promotion over the years. He knew that he couldn't let Yi Qian face Yijifan head-on. Principal Chen picked up a peanut and put it in his mouth. His mind was racing. In other words, this jade pendant isn't a good thing for Yi Qian and Yi Qian's mother. You can say that. Uncle Jen narrowed his eyes slightly. His serious expression had the wisdom of an old man who understood life. It's not a good thing for Yijifan either. He was suddenly given so much power. Think about it. Why? There's no good or bad without reason. There's always a reason for everything. Ever since Yijifan got the jade pendant from the village to the town, his career has been so smooth that it's amazing. The more I think about it, the more certain I am that someone is directly controlling Yijifan. If an official is controlled by someone else, that official might become someone else's scapegoat. Principal Chen was shocked. He lowered his voice and said, "Are you saying that martyr Sun Xueqing was ordered to investigate the jade pendant, but unfortunately, she was killed because she was exposed? Then why didn't the owner of the jade pendant immediately take it back? Why did they let Yijifan have it and promote him so arrogantly? Aren't you being too high profile? Aren't they afraid that the higher-ups will find out? Moreover, from the looks of it, I can only see that this piece of jade has brought benefits. It has allowed Yijifan to rise all the way to the provincial office. Also, don't you think it's strange that Sun Yaozu was acquitted? Who investigated the case for him? Who overturned the case? I don't think it's possible for Sun Yaozu to appeal on his own. How could a fugitive throw himself at the muzzle of a gun? Are you saying that someone secretly helped him?" Uncle Jen didn't think about this point. It was mainly because old lady Yi scolded Yijifan that night and said that he raised an ungrateful person. Also, with Yijifan's cautiousness, he wouldn't take the risk to help a fugitive. Principal Chen paused for a moment and said, "Sun Yaozu became an innocent person. He swaggered back home and started a big construction project. He held a big banquet and became a famous big boss in town. His actions were very high profile. It was as if he had found a big backer." This analysis caught a point. The two elders looked at each other and revealed a smile of understanding. Principal Chen sighed and said, "This jade pendant is indeed a disaster. Yijifan is holding it now and thinks that he got a treasure. When he gets too high and falls, he will know how miserable it is." Chapter 1100. A second ago, he was worried about Yijifan's rapid promotion, but the next second, he was elated. The owner of the jade pendant knows how to use checks and balances. He used the relationship between Sun Yaozu and Yijifan to restrain Yijifan. He wasn't afraid that Yijifan wouldn't listen to him. Principal Chen picked up the small aluminum wine pot that was still warm in boiling water and poured himself and old Uncle Jen a small cup. "I didn't expect this person to be so powerful. This thing is indeed a scourge." Old Uncle Jen smiled and sighed. There was sadness in his old voice. "If the jade was a good one, I would have asked Miss Jian to take it back. Unfortunately, it's not a good one. It caused Miss Jian's mother to sacrifice herself. How can I let it stay by Miss Jian's side? It's not a bad idea to let Yijifan take it. I want to know if Miss Jian's mother sacrificed herself while carrying out a mission with the jade pendant. Or was it related to the mission? If we want to know, we need someone to help us lure out the person behind the jade pendant. I've only persuaded one person to join the army in my life, and that was Yi Qian's mother. Also, you said that it was a waste of talent for Miss Jian not to join the army. I thought about it for a long time and only agreed when I knew that she was willing. Old Chin, I didn't let Miss Jian go back to the village all these years. I let her train with you alone so that she can become stronger. She won't be bullied because she doesn't have parents, and she won't be harmed by the person behind the jade pendant. After the college entrance exam, you can continue training with Miss Jian. You don't have to come back to the village. Granny Yi has already returned to the village. You don't have to let Miss Jian see such an old woman. The two elders talked in the living room until 11 o'clock at night. They didn't let Yi Qian know about their conversation. There were some things that they needed to tell Yi Qian, but it wouldn't be too late to tell him after Yi Qian was admitted to the military academy. Outside the window, the cold wind rustled. Leaving the stove in the house without heating, one would feel cold all over. It was too late at night, and the lights in the houses were gradually extinguished. Some people, like Yi Qian, went to bed early. Yi Zhifan, who had just returned from a business meeting, was still awake. He sat at his desk, smoking cigarette after cigarette. Not only did Sun Yaozu come back openly, he even called him to tell him that his identity had been settled. How could a fugitive who had been wanted for so many years have the police withdraw the arrest warrant? How could this be? He had been in the coastal area for so long and had yet to settle his identity. Suddenly, it was settled in less than 3 months after he was promoted to the provincial office. There were even rumors that someone important was helping him. Noble. Who is the benefactor of trash like Sun Yaozu? Why didn't he settle it earlier or later? Why did he have someone to settle it for him when he was transferred to the provincial office? Strange, too strange. It was so strange that it made him feel extremely uneasy. He was so uneasy that he couldn't sleep for the past few days. He had a feeling that this matter wasn't simple. It was as if they were coming for him. Dad, why aren't you asleep yet? Ying pushed open the unlocked door of the study. She was wearing thick cotton pajamas and holding a pen in her hand. The moment she entered, she choked on the smell of alcohol and cigarettes in the study. Don't smoke so much. It's like the house is on fire from the smoke. He walked over to open the window and let the cold air outside blow away the smell in the room. He then heard her advise, you don't have to smoke or drink to solve your stress at work. It's the same to relax. Yi Ying, who he hadn't seen for a year, had also grown into a slender and elegant woman. Other than her slightly darker skin tone, she was indeed quite beautiful. She had an oval face, almond-shaped eyes, curved willowy eyebrows, and a small mouth. She was like an 18 or 19-year-old flower, so tender that water could come out of it. She was so bright that she shone brightly. Chapter 1101. Yi Zhifan pressed the cigarette butt into the ashtray and watched his daughter stand up. He frowned and asked, why aren't you asleep yet? It's so late. Did I wake you up? His gaze fell on Yi Ying's right hand, which was holding a pen, and his frown deepened. You're staying up late to revise again. You can't stay up so late just to study. Why didn't your mom remind you? Where's your mom? Dad, I'm revising secretly. Mom doesn't even know. I'm fine. You're the one who's in trouble. Yi Ying seemed to be afraid that Yi Zhifan would blame Sun Dongqing. She quickly said, you look troubled. Is your work not going well? She pursed her lips and revealed a worried expression. You're busy enough outside during the day, and sometimes you have to entertain clients at night. You should be the one who takes care of your health the most at home. I'm fine. Mom will take care of me. You're so tired. You need to rest even more. Otherwise, Mom and I will be very worried. As Yi Zhifan's official position rose, he came home later and later at night. Sun Dongqing did not mind, but Yi Ying cared a lot. The age of 18 or 19 happened to be in the sensitive period, Because she often heard from her classmates in school that her father had a mistress outside, had a child, and was going to divorce her mother, Yi Ying was a little afraid in her heart after hearing so much. Yi Jifan was now a provincial official, but Sun Dongqing was still the same Sun Dongqing. She had not made any progress in the past few years and only enjoyed life. Fortunately, she had learned how to dress up and take care of herself. In order to be able to stand tall in front of the official's wife and consciously lose weight, her mental state could not keep up with Yi Jifan's. In terms of appearance, she would not embarrass Yi Jifan. Yi Jifan could not guess what his daughter was thinking. However, seeing that his daughter was concerned about him, he was naturally happy. He smiled and said, "Dad is fine. Go back to sleep. You have to get up early when you go back to school tomorrow. Go to sleep. Dad is going to sleep now." Seeing this, Yi Ying did not insist. She softly said, "Then you should rest early. Good night." When she walked to the door, Yi Jifan suddenly called out to her. "Ying, did your grandma call recently?" "No, I didn't answer grandma's call, but Mom should have." Yi Ying replied casually. Over the past year or so, the family had been in contact with their youngest aunt and grandmother a lot, but it was usually grandmother who took the initiative to call. She added, "Every time grandmother calls, she's looking for you." She asked mother to reject the call. On this point, Yi Jifan firmly believed it. Now that he was an official, Sun Dongqing, who had been ruthlessly stabbed by the old woman when she was young, could stand straighter and straighter in front of her. As long as it was related to her family and him, Sun Dongqing would never be polite. It was also because Sun Dongqing was wholeheartedly devoted to this family and her husband that he could accept some things even if she didn't do as he wished. Yi Jifan didn't ask any more questions. He motioned for his daughter to go back and rest, while he stayed in the study for a long time. The next day, Sun Dongqing, who was preparing breakfast for her daughter, said angrily, "What's wrong with your father?" She was like a firecracker early in the morning. When she asked him, she was even yelled at. "I asked him to send you to school, but he said he didn't have time. What kind of father is he? Mom, you should be more concerned about Dad. It's useless for you to worry about my studies. You can't help me. Instead of talking about Dad by my ear every day, why don't you ask Dad what happened these past few days? Also, Dad suddenly asked me if Grandma called last night. Dad never asks, but he suddenly asked me. Something must have happened. If you want him to be nicer to you, Mom, you should at least know what Dad is worried about." Chapter 1102. Why was it that some women could coax their men so well that they wouldn't dare to go against her if she told them to go east? Wherever she told them to go, the man could only go there willingly. It could be seen that coaxing people was a skill. Yi Ying was quite proficient in the art of coaxing. Ever since she learned that Wang Dandan's father had a mistress outside and did not return home for a few days, Yi Ying, who had a pretty good EQ, immediately realized the situation at home and felt a sense of crisis. So every time she saw Sun Dongqing's expression that said, "He dares to abandon me," she was always angry. But after all, she was her mother. Even if she was angry, she had to suppress it and remind her mother. "Mom, look at yourself. Have you said anything to Dad this week? Dad has been busy since the second day of the new year. He comes home at 11 or 12 o'clock every night. As his wife, have you waited for him? Have you cared about him? You said that Dad is always angry with you. Mom, I beg you to think about your own reasons, okay? Don't focus on me all the time. I'm already an adult. Don't I know how to take care of myself?" Ever since Yi Ying entered high school, Yi Ying could make decisions for Sun Dongqing in some matters at home. Sun Dongqing could choose not to listen to her husband, but she must listen to her daughter. Seeing her daughter's cold expression, Sun Dongqing quickly took out a boiled egg and put it in Yi Ying's bowl to please her. She continued disapprovingly, "I've been married to your father for decades. Do you think I don't know what kind of person he is? Give him some color and he can start a dye factory. Eat an egg. I heard that eating an egg every day before the college entrance examination won't make you catch a cold. Eat, eat." Her disapproval made Yi Ying's suppressed anger burst out. She slammed her chopsticks on the table and said angrily, "Mom, are you really waiting for Dad to abandon you before you know what fear is? Who is Dad now? Do you think he's still the little village official in the village? Dad is now a provincial official. Do you know how colorful the outside world is? Do you know how many women are dreaming of being an official's wife? How old is Dad now? He's just in his early 40s. The golden age of a man. Powerful, and mature. Mom, do you know how many people outside can't wait for Dad to leave you and divorce you?" Yi Ying had never said these words to Sun Dongqing before. At this moment, she finally couldn't help but burst out all at once. What she said really scared Sun Dongqing. After the scare, Sun Dongqing pulled a long face and shouted, "How dare he! When I was young, I followed him. In the end, I was harmed by that damned old woman. I didn't even have the chance to give you a younger brother or sister. Your father forced me to endure it for his own sake. I've suffered so much with him, and he dares to divorce me. Why wouldn't I? If Dad really dares to do so, what can you do? Was this a joke? Can you outdo Dad?" Yi Ying was so angry that she didn't even hear what Sun Dongqing said. She rushed back to her room without even finishing her breakfast, picked up her bag, and left with a bang. Sun Dongqing was stunned by her daughter's scolding. In her memory, her daughter had never lost her temper like this. What divorce? What golden age? Who cursed their own parents like that? That wasn't right. Why would she say those things out of the blue? Could it be that Ying saw or heard something outside and came back to remind her? Divorce her? Yi Jifan, how dare he? Chapter 1103. Her temper is becoming more and more like her father's. She gets angry at the slightest thing. Did I owe you too in my previous life? Sun Dongqing said angrily. She didn't look too good. Staring at the breakfast that was getting cold, Sun Dongqing thought for a while and got up to call Yi Jifan. Your mother called on the 3rd day of the new year and asked us to go over on the 6th day of the new year to move. I didn't agree. If you think there's a problem, call her and ask. Move. Yi Jifan, who wasn't in a good mood, had been dozing off in the car. When he heard this, he suddenly sat up and said in a low voice, "Move? What move?" Sun Dongqing, who had been scolded by her husband and daughter early in the morning, said angrily, "How would I know? I haven't seen her call to ask about our family in the past few years. Now that you've been promoted, she's trying to curry favor with you. How can I let her off so easily? Old Yi, let me tell you. Your mother and I are mortal enemies in this life. Don't even think about being a filial son. For Sun Yaozu, she won't even let go of your career. Why should I be good to her?" Yi Jifan had a knot in his heart when it came to the past, but what was the point of mentioning it after so many years? The past couldn't be changed. The current plan was to find out who was secretly settling Sun Yaozu's matter. As for the old woman, now that Sun Yaozu's identity had been restored, would she still be involved in the company? Ask around and find out where she's moving to. Someone secretly settled Sun Yaozu's identity. Even I didn't dare to promise, but someone did it for them. Tell me, can I go against my mother now? She's been outside for so many years and her business is so big. Is it possible that they don't have any connections? They only contacted me because my surname is Yi and I'm my mother's son. Compared to outsiders, my son is much more reliable. Yi Jifan had never mentioned to Sun Dongqing that someone had promoted him behind the jade pendant, nor did he mention that he wasn't old Madame Ye's biological son. There were many things that couldn't be known by Sun Dongqing. Under such circumstances, he could only say this so that Sun Dongqing, who had put all her heart into the family, would restrain herself and even lower her head. Moreover, this time he really wasn't trying to scare Sun Dongqing. You can remember the past, but you can't mention it again. For the sake of Yingying's future, for the sake of our family, it's not time to fall out with my mother yet. With these words, Sun Dongqing was really intimidated. Like a shrew, she had followed her husband's rise to higher positions. She had seen more and more things. She could more or less distinguish between what was beneficial and what was harmful. Hearing this, her face turned ashen as she said, "Old fart, you really do have some ability. I'll call back to the village and ask her where she's moving. I'll call you once I know the answer." After that, Sun Dongqing hung up the phone and called the village head's house. Yi Ying, who had run outside, felt the cold wind of winter blow on her, and her mind immediately cleared up a lot. The sentence, "Because of that damned old hag, I didn't even have the chance to give you a younger brother or sister," flashed through her mind. Her heart suddenly skipped a beat. Why did she feel that this sentence was a bit strange? Coincidentally, the bus to the school came over. Yi Ying temporarily suppressed the strangeness in her heart. She would ask about it when she got back at night. There were already many students from the provincial second high school on the bus. At the same time, there were also students wearing the provincial first high school's uniform. The bus passed by two schools. Even if Yi Ying didn't want to hear about Yi Qian, she had heard about it for more than a year. Chapter 1104. Although Yi Ying didn't continue her studies at the provincial high school, she knew everything about Yi Qian. For example, Hua University and Shi University were both waiting for her to agree, but in the end, she rejected them. She even said that her first choice wasn't Hua University or Shi University, but other schools. What a joke! Hua University and Shi University were the best schools in the country. Who knew how many people dreamed of going to those schools? She gave them up just like that. How was that possible? Only those idiots in the provincial high school who had been deceived by her would believe her. She even rejected the direct enrollment of the best schools in the country and said that her first choice wasn't here. What, did she want to study abroad? Why didn't she take a look at herself first? Although she didn't continue her studies at the provincial high school, her competitive spirit was still there. Every time Yi Ying heard about how Yi Qian did in the provincial high school, she would work even harder in the car. She was determined to compete with Yi Qian. Unfortunately, from the second year to the third year, she had never won against Yi Qian. Whether it was the big exams or the small exams, when she heard about Yi Qian's scores, Yi Ying, who was originally happy that she could enter the top 10 of the grade, was furious again. It seemed that no matter how hard she worked in her studies, she would never be able to surpass Yi Qian. The car drove steadily. There were piles of snow on the side of the road that hadn't melted yet. The gray and white had long lost the white of snow. At 7:00 in the morning, the third-year students from the provincial high school rushed to school to start their last sprint. Everyone's expression was tense. They were all worried about their future. They were afraid that they wouldn't be able to get into school, afraid that they wouldn't be able to get into Zhongshan, afraid that their results wouldn't be satisfactory. These students were worried about this and that, but the third-year students from the provincial high school were different. Everyone's face was full of smiles. When they met at the school gate, they said loudly, "Happy New Year, may you be rich. Give me the red packets." Damn, there are no red packets this year. I'll take them all. You even threatened me that if I don't get into university, I won't get any red packets. You're so pitiful. I took the red packets and played games during the day. I played crazily during the day and studied at night. Playing and studying at the same time. When the students from the other classes heard this, they didn't feel good. They were all students, why was there such a difference? They had to wake up early to do homework during the 10 days of the winter break, but the first-year students still had time to play. Is Yi Qian here yet? The few of us haven't solved a problem yet, so we'll let her see how to solve it. After a few words, the topic shifted to Yi Qian. Under the envious gazes of the other classes, the students of Class 1 quickly walked towards the school building together. The new year brought a new atmosphere. Old classmates greeted each other with a "Happy New Year" when they met. Then, they took out the exam papers they had done during the winter break and started marking each other. In the second year of high school, the students of Class 1 of grade 12 in the province developed the habit of marking each other's papers. The person who proposed this method was the class monitor, Lu Axin. The students of grade 12 Class 1 had the ability to mark each other's papers. Everyone's results were outstanding. Every parent knew that the reason why their children could improve so much was because of the good learning atmosphere in the class. Some parents knew that the 5 roommates of Yi Qian who had been in the same dormitory as him were all in the top 20 and top 30 of the grade. Some parents even privately suggested to Teacher Tong that their children should go to the dormitory where Yi Qian had slept. They said that the dormitory had good feng shui and that there was Wen Chu Xing in charge. The students didn't know about this. When Teacher Tong found out, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She explained with a smile, "Then you're wrong. Yi Qian himself is in charge of our class. What are you worried about?" Chapter 1105. Although she didn't know whether to laugh or cry, she could tell that every parent had high expectations for their child. Yi Qian arrived at the classroom at 7:10 a.m. as usual. Then, like every morning last year, she was always surrounded by the most students. A happy day began with a lecture and ended with a lecture. This was the last semester of the 3rd year of high school. When she opened her eyes, she studied until she crawled into bed to sleep. Looking at the date of the college entrance exam on the blackboard, although the students' grades were good, they were still nervous about preparing for the exam. They didn't relax at all. Everyone gave it their all to get into a good school. Uncle Jen watched Yi Qian wake up early in the morning and train until 11 p.m. every night. Although his heart ached, he never said that he wanted to stop Yi Qian's training. The old man believed that only by enduring hardship could one rise above others. Little Jian has been able to endure hardships since she was a child. Her mother left her in the village for the old woman of the Yi family to take care of her for the first year. The little girl was not shy with strangers. When she was hungry, she knew to look for food by herself. When the old woman hit her, she still knew to hug the legs of the villagers. Actually, Uncle Jen didn't know what kind of life Yi Jian lived before she was 3 years old. He only heard about it from the villagers. While he was talking, this old man who had been through many wars couldn't help but wipe the corners of his eyes. He knew very well that Yi Qian had suffered before she was 14. He even watched her suffer. Back then, he mentioned that he wanted to bring her back and raise her. Everyone in the village and town was present. In the end, the one who changed his mind was Yi Qian. He spent a lot of effort on this matter and got this result. When he saw that she didn't have any ability to stand on her own 2 feet, he gradually gave up and didn't mention it again. Fortunately, in the end, this little girl finally stood up. She was no longer a coward who couldn't resist. Step by step, she finally became a good girl. "I have to go back to the village tomorrow," I'm worried about Yi Jifan. Looking at Yi Qian standing on a row of steel needles with a steel ball in his hands, Uncle Jen whispered to Principal Chin, I have to go back to the village to take charge. Principal Chin said, if Yi Jifan really wants to join forces with Sun Yaozu, you won't be able to do anything even if you stay in the village. Besides, Sun Yaozu is such a person. I'm really worried that he might do something worse than a beast when the time comes. What he meant was that he was afraid that if he called people over, they would secretly harm Uncle Jen. If I'm going to be harmed, it depends on how capable the person behind Sun Yaozu is to protect him. Uncle Jen harumphed as a murderous aura appeared between his eyebrows. Now that you mention it, I really want to see it. Daring to harm a first-rank sergeant major, he wanted to see if he really had the guts to do so. Principal Chen smiled bitterly. Who knows? Sun Yaozu is now rich and has someone behind him. If he really does something worse than a beast, he can just find a few scapegoats to take the blame and he will be fine. Who can say for sure? You can't guess it, and neither can I. We can only be careful. Besides, Miss Jian is happy that you're staying here. Listen to my advice. Stay here and wait for Miss Jian to finish her college entrance exam. After the cutoff score is out, you can accompany her to the military academy. Miss Jian and I are really worried about returning to the village. Chapter 1106. Yi Qian didn't want Uncle Jen to go back to the village. She wiped the sweat off her forehead after training and objected, it's true that living here isn't as comfortable as living in the village. There's no one to chat with you, but you've only been here for 2 days. How can you go back so soon? I won't object if you want to go back, but you have to rest well first. It takes 18 hours to travel from our village to the provincial capital. How can you take it if you haven't rested well? I even heard you coughing in the wee hours of the morning. 4 years had passed, and Uncle Jen had aged a lot. He was like an old pine tree. Although his back was still straight, it was showing signs of withering. Yi Qian looked at the old man who had changed her life. Tears welled up in her eyes. Girl, you're speaking with such authority now. Even the look in your eyes is imposing. Grandpa Jen coughed softly, like a broken blower that had lost its power. Grandpa is getting old. It's not comfortable living outside. I miss home. When one was old, they would want to return to their roots. No matter how comfortable living outside was, it was not as comfortable as living at home. Uncle Jen's uneven coughs came from the living room. Even his back was bent a little. Yi Qian looked at the old man's thin body in his cotton jacket. Suddenly, her heart thumped heavily. Then, an uncontrollable wave of panic washed over her like a tidal wave. She almost couldn't stand still. Panicking, she grabbed Uncle Jen's skinny hand and said softly, if you really want to go back, I'll go with you. Is that okay? The 3rd year of high school started a week early to make up for the missed classes. She could ask the teacher for leave and come back when the classes officially started. Girl Jian. Uncle Jen suppressed the itch in his throat and said sternly, school is school. You have to attend classes properly. How can you do whatever you want? The school has its rules, and the class has its rules. As a reservist who is valued by the military, how can you ignore the rules and discipline? Looking at the elder who had always been strict in front of her in terms of rules, Yi Jian, who was so flustered that her eyes turned red, couldn't say anything. Her lips moved, and she couldn't say anything that was difficult to say. In her previous life, when Yi Qian returned to the village after school, she only found out that Uncle Jen had passed away a few years ago. As for how many years it had been, she did not ask. She secretly returned to the village to see Yi Ying's glory, then saw her own downfall, and then quietly left the village. That year, he was 21 years old. Now, she was 18 years old. It took him less than 3 years to reach the age of 21. At this moment, her heart was filled with regret. She regretted not going back to spend more time with this elder who had changed her life. She regretted not thinking in this direction. If she could start over in this life, did that mean that Uncle Jen did not have to follow the same path as he did in his previous life? Would he be able to live a long life? Yi Qian thought to herself, but when she saw Uncle Jen's skinny hands holding the gun, she panicked to the point that her heartbeat became irregular. She panicked to the point that all she wanted to do was to keep this elder here. The college entrance exam is only a few days away. Girl Jian, you can't let your guard down, okay? If you want to spend time with Grandpa, you have to wait until the exam is over. By then, Grandpa will be waiting for you to come back with firecrackers. Uncle Jen could see that Yi Qian was afraid, but he didn't know what she was afraid of. He thought that she was afraid of him leaving. Chapter 1107. Translator, Henyi Translations Editor, Henyi Translations. Then he smiled kindly and said, Grandpa also raised dozens of chickens and ducks at home, waiting for you to go back after the college entrance exam so that they can nourish your body. Girls should still take care of their bodies. Train hard normally, but when you're free, you should cultivate your body and make up for what you've lost in the past. This is the only long-term plan. Uncle Jen was indeed worried. If he could convince Principal Chin, he could also convince Yi Qian. But because Yi Qian had a knot in her heart, she took a day longer than Principal Chin to convince her. When Yi Qian went to school the next day, Uncle Jen said to Principal Chin, I don't know who this girl's temper is like. Even her mother wasn't as stubborn as her when she was young. I said that I would be leaving today, but it seems like I'll have to stay for another day. Uncle, you should rest for another day. Principal Chin was convinced last night, but it didn't mean that he would accept it immediately. Right now, he was thinking the same thing as Yi Qian. He wanted to stay for another day. No matter what, Uncle Jen still went back. Yi Qian didn't send him to school. She wanted to send him, but Uncle Jen insisted on it. Yi Qian, who usually arrived at school at 7:00 in the morning, made an exception today. She didn't leave until 7:30. Looking at Uncle Jen, who was standing at the door and waving at her, Yi Qian still felt uneasy even though the whole night had passed. Study hard, girl. Uncle Jen gestured for Yi Qian to go to school quickly. Although the old man's eyes were cloudy, they were still filled with wisdom. He smiled gently, kind and benevolent. The sun was out, and Yi Qian, who was sitting by the window, was bathed in the warm winter sun. She was reading the review materials while writing notes in her notebook. The faint golden sunlight shrouded her, giving her a sense of peace and serenity that came from being isolated from the rest of the world. Yi Qian, help me take a look at this question. A classmate came over with a math test paper and humbly asked her for guidance. I found something wrong with the fourth step and couldn't analyze it any further. But I think the formula is correct. A student interrupted Yi Qian's train of thought. She did not raise her head as she held a pencil and corrected the mistakes on the test paper. The formula is correct, but you didn't draw the auxiliary lines correctly. At 11:00, the train set off. Yi Qian looked at the time and pursed her lips slightly. She wanted to go back to the village to take a look. She hadn't been back for a few years, so she should go back to the village to take a look. Yi Qian was good at hiding her worries. Even after Uncle Jen went back, she didn't show any of her worries on her face. She came to school alone and went to the special training camp alone. Even Enchanting, who was very close to her, would only occasionally notice that her childhood friend was in a daze. At this time, Yi Qian hid her worries to the extent that even Enchanting, who was very close to her, couldn't see through her. She was calculating the time. It would take 18 to 19 hours to get back to the town from the provincial capital. She also calculated that she would call home at around 8 or 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Yi Qian didn't feel relieved until she heard Uncle Jen's energetic voice on the phone. Maybe she was thinking too much. She could live another life. Maybe Grandpa Jen could also live a long life because of her appearance. Yi Qian, who had hung up the phone with a smile, did not know that old Madame Yi had arrived just in time. She was sitting in the main hall of the hall. Her kind face revealed a hint of harshness. She put on a fake smile and said to Uncle Jen, "Brother, you have to give me an answer today. Little Jian is my eldest son's daughter. How can you transfer her household registration out of the family?" Chapter 1108. If Jifan didn't come back and tell me about this, I wouldn't even know that you've done something so despicable. Yi Jifan said helplessly, "Uncle, last night when I got home and got drunk, we talked about Yi Qian's household registration. My mother got mad at me and scolded me for not taking care of my niece and letting her wander outside. You know my mother's personality. When I woke up and realized that I had said something wrong, I couldn't appease her no matter how much I apologized. So I brought her to you. How do you think we should deal with this?" Old Madame Yi slapped the table and said angrily, "What do you mean by how we should deal with this? Yi Qian is my granddaughter. She's the blood of the Yi family. How can we let her go outside? Just transfer her household registration under my name. No one can touch the glory of the Yi family's blood." That brat really had some tricks up her sleeves. She had forced Sun Dongqing, a shrew, into a corner and forced Yi Jifan to agree to transfer her household registration. She wanted to escape from the Yi family. No way. Faced with old Madame Ye's arrogance, Uncle Jen smoked his pipe and said slowly, "That brat's surname is Yi. The blood of the Yi family runs in her body. No one can change that. As for where her household registration will be, it's not up to me to decide. An 18-year-old child can open a separate household registration." An 18-year-old was considered an adult and had the ability to conduct civil affairs. They were fully capable of civil affairs. Just as Uncle Jen said, even if Yi Qian had a separate household registration, it would still be legal. I don't care if she's 18 or 28. I only know that she's my granddaughter. Jifan, since you've told Uncle Jen about this, you should do it well. I'll feel uneasy as long as my child doesn't come home. Old Madame Yi had lived a respectable life for more than 10 years. She was a woman of her word. She didn't think there was anything wrong with making the decision. Since she said it, the people around her had to listen. It was the same in the company and at home. She didn't believe that a man of several decades couldn't take care of a young girl. Although she had reached an agreement with Yi Jifan, it didn't matter if she showed some sincerity first. Only visible sincerity would allow the cooperation to continue for a long time. Only by tasting the sweetness would he know his family's attitude. As Yi Jifan watched, he sneered in his heart. At the end of the day, all she did was show up. She was still the one who had to do the actual work. She then sighed and said, "Mother, I think what Uncle said makes sense. No matter where Yi Qian's household registration is now, she will always have the surname Yi. No matter where she goes, she will still be Big Brother's daughter. I think it's better if you don't take it to heart, so as not to hurt the harmony between neighbors." What did he mean by that? Was she trying to undermine him? Old Madame Yi, who was infuriated, sneered. What an ingrate. Everything was fine last night, but he changed his mind today. I haven't even blamed you for raising a good granddaughter of mine outside, but you're helping an outsider to anger me. Old Madame Yi was furious. She had wanted to quickly get Yi Qian's household registration out and then tamper with it a little. Now that she had finally made a move, it was going to cause more trouble. How could Uncle Jen not understand when he heard this? They wanted to work together to restrain Yi Qian, but in the end, there were still benefits to be discussed. He didn't even make a move and started fighting among himself. Fight, fight, fight. The fiercer they fight, the less it will affect Jian Yiling. Chapter 1109. You two don't have to argue in front of me. You don't have to worry about Miss Jian's household registration. As for the Yi family, you don't have to worry about anyone taking advantage of Miss Jian. I'm an 80-year-old old man, and I don't have much time left. I can't take advantage of her. Old Man Jen said coldly as he placed the copper pipe back on the table. His old but dignified face revealed a hint of coldness. Yi Jifan and old Madam Yi didn't dare to speak loudly again. In Shuka village, Uncle Jen had always been respected. Miss Jian was about to take the college entrance exam, and they still wanted to do something. They had to see if they had the ability to do so. Although Yi Jifan was a provincial official, he didn't have much of an aura in front of Uncle General. He didn't have the guts to confront a first-grade sergeant major who didn't even need to salute the chief. He quickly apologized. Uncle, don't be angry. It's my fault for saying something I shouldn't have. Yi Qian's surname is still Yi. My mother is old and conservative. Plus, she was worried about her own granddaughter, so she was rude. Please don't take offense. Good fellow, not only did he clear his name, but he also successfully pushed all the blame to old Madam Yi. It seemed like Yi Jifan was used to pushing the blame to others. That was why he was so skilled at it. Second brother, it seems like you want your sister-in-law and brother to die with grievances. You received benefits from your sister-in-law and promised me to take good care of Yi Qian. You didn't want to take responsibility after receiving benefits. I didn't expect you to be this kind of person. You've disappointed me, really disappointed me. Old Madam Ye's reaction wasn't bad either. She brought up Yi Qian's mother. She saw Yi Jifan's vexed face and sneered. So what if he was a provincial official? Didn't he start off by taking advantage of others? She then stood up and said to Uncle Jen, Brother, Yi Qian doesn't even acknowledge me as her grandmother. She needs to be disciplined. If I don't raise her by my side, I can't explain it to boss. This matter can't be messed up. Since she didn't manage to reach an agreement with Yi Jifan, she had to continue talking. She couldn't do what she wanted to do without room for negotiation. She had to stop here first and bring it up again. Old Madam Yi didn't want to strain her relationship with Yi Jifan. Therefore, she left a sentence that said, she will come again in the future, so that there would be room for discussion with Yi Jifan. Yi. Little Miss Jian has a wide road ahead of her. You'd better stop the dirty thoughts in your heart. Otherwise, if little Miss Jian really remembers you, I'm afraid you won't be able to bear the consequences. Yi Jifan's face stiffened at the mention of old Madam Yi. Fortunately, he was able to maintain his composure. He sighed and said, Uncle, you have a deep prejudice against me. I'll explain it to you next time. I won't disturb your peace today. Goodbye. He didn't stay any longer and hurriedly walked out. Uncle Jen said to Principal Chin, who had just walked out of the room, See, Dongfeng? I also want little Miss Jian to come back. But she really can't come back now. If she comes back, she'll be pestered by the Yi family. They still want to take little Miss Jian's household registration. They're despicable. They want to use this to suppress little Miss Jian and prevent her from becoming outstanding. Chapter 1110. There had to be a reason why she didn't want Yi Qian to succeed. Grandma wasn't like Grandma, and Uncle wasn't like Uncle. No matter how he looked at it, it was strange. Principal Chin pondered for a while before asking, "Uncle, why do I feel like that old lady's relationship with Yi Jifan isn't good? There's something strange about it. Also, Yi Jifan wants to suppress Yi Qian because of his daughter. I can understand it as jealousy. But I can't understand old lady Ye's behavior. If my analysis is correct, she came here because of Yi Jifan's request. She's trying to use her status as his elder to move Yi Qian's household registration back. Yi Qian is her granddaughter. Shouldn't she be happy that her grandson is successful? Why would she want to ruin her granddaughter's future?" Others might not be able to see through the problem, but Headmaster Chin could see the problem from the two verbal conflicts. The Yi family's situation isn't that complicated. It'll take a few more hours to explain. Uncle Jen sighed softly and told Principal Chin everything that Yi Qian didn't know. "It's good that you know some things. I'm afraid that when I pass away, no one will tell her those things." He had just started, but the information revealed in his words already made Principal Chin surprised. "No one will tell Yi Qian those things. What are they?" Yi Qian's house was at the end of the village. There was a mountain at the back and a stream at the front. There weren't as many villagers coming and going as there were in the village. The two oiled doors of the main hall were wide open. There was no need to worry about people eavesdropping. Uncle Jen spoke very slowly, and every word he said shocked Headmaster Chin. In the end, Headmaster Chin could only say two words: "No wonder, no wonder, no wonder." No wonder they were not mother and son. They were adopted. If that was the case, it was normal for their relationship to be strained. No wonder Yi Qian didn't look like old lady Yi. So that's why. Principal Chen was extremely shocked, and had not yet calmed down. He asked again, why didn't old uncle let Yi Qian know about this? There's no harm in telling her about it. You don't have to tell Jian Yiling about these things for the time being. You can only tell her when the Yi family continues to cause trouble. Uncle Jen shook his head. He didn't plan to tell Yi Qian in the near future. It's okay to tell her, but we have to at least wait until her future is stable. Look, there are so many twists and turns in high school. We can't let other things distract her. Now, it would be difficult for the Yi clan to touch Jian Yiling. Why don't we let the Yi family make a big fuss and see if the person behind the jade pendant has any reaction? Principal Chen suddenly understood. You still want to lure out the person behind the jade pendant, right? That's right. The trouble caused by the Yi family doesn't have much impact on the Jian girl. They want to move their household registration out, but it's not something that a provincial cadre like Yi Jifan can solve. Once Miss Jian was accepted into the military academy, her household registration would be cancelled. What else could they do? They can't do anything. At this time, it was all thanks to Major Xiao's preparations. If he had dealt with it now, it would have been difficult for Jian Yiling to apply for the military academy. Thinking about it carefully, other than the Yi family having designs on Jian Yiling's household registration, there was really no other loophole that they could exploit. No, they couldn't exploit the loophole in her household registration either. Chen Xiao thought about it carefully and laughed. The Yi family can't control Jian Yiling. No matter how much Yi Jifan wants to stand up for his daughter, there's nothing he can do. It's more important to find the person behind the jade pendant. At least we can find out if martyr Sun Xueqing really sacrificed herself because of the jade pendant. Chapter 11:11. She spoke in a low voice, and from time to time, she could hear the howling of the black cat locked in the room. The farmhouse with blue tiles and white walls surrounded by mountains was extremely quiet. Behind the house, there were clouds and mist in the depths of the mountains. In front of the house, the peach trees were already covered with tender leaves, waiting for a spring breeze to blow by. After chasing out of the peach trees, Yijifan finally saw the old lady walking to the ridge of the fields. Stepping on the wet road, Yijifan stopped chasing after her. He slowed down and walked step by step leisurely, as if he was taking a leisurely stroll. A newly built, exceptionally stylish bungalow was located right in the middle of the village. Madame Yi, who was full of anger, entered the new, stylish bungalow that was built on the foundation of the Yi family's old mansion. She wanted to wait for Yi Jifan to take the initiative to apologize to her, but she didn't see him for a few hours. Only when the famous gossip woman in the village, Aunt Chiu, came did she know that Yi Jifan had left. He actually left. He didn't even say goodbye. I'm so angry. I'm so angry. Do they still have me in their eyes? After Aunt Chiu left, old Madame Yi flew into a rage alone at home. Now, only she and old man Yi were at home. No matter how fierce the argument was, no one would come out to persuade her. Sun Yaozu took Yi Zhixiang and her two sons to attend a class reunion and would only be back at night. Old Madame Yi, who had no one to persuade her, immediately called Yi Jifan after losing her temper. Yi Jifan, who was rushing to the city, looked at the phone number and sneered. He slowly picked up the phone. Mom, what's the matter? What do you want? Didn't we agree that I would get Miss Jian's household registration back for you, and you would help your brother-in-law win the bid for the city construction project? What, we just agreed last night, and you forgot today. After venting her anger, old Madame Yi could finally speak calmly. Her tone was much calmer. Your brother-in-law has money, and you have power. As long as we cooperate well, you can take root in the southern province, and no one can do anything to you. Why would you reject a win-win cooperation? Yi Jifan didn't take the bus back. He took the shabby minibus from the town to the city. Amidst the shaking, he smiled faintly and said, "What I want to do is not something you can just talk about. Anyone can talk about it. I can talk about it too. What I want is for someone to do it for me, to do what I want to do." Old Madame Yi said coldly, "Why don't you just find someone else to do it after I've told you everything?" What? Don't tell me that a provincial cadre like you can't even solve a household registration problem. Mom, if things were really that simple, would I still need to cooperate with Sun Yaozu in this way? There are still 3 months before the college entrance examination. I hope to settle the household registration before the college entrance examination. Mom, the household register depends on you. Yi Jifan smiled and hung up the phone directly without worrying about old Madame Yi's anger. Cooperate with Sun Yaozu. Chi. Working with a fugitive. Unless he was sick. He just wanted to see if there was someone behind him. There was definitely someone behind Yi Qian. He had been secretly investigating for the past few years, and even sent people to keep an eye on him at school. However, there was no news. There was news from the underworld that a girl named Yi Qian had a good relationship with Master Ho San, the boss of the Southern Province Road. It was also said that Master Ho San had dealt with a few hooligans for her. He also investigated after the incident but found nothing. How could a student and a boss of the underworld have a good relationship with each other? Chapter 11-12. She didn't know who was behind Yi Qian. She didn't know if the person behind Sun Yaozu was the same as her. She didn't know anything. Since she didn't know anything, she had to investigate. She had been investigating for so long without any progress, so she had to find another way to investigate. Just as Uncle Jen said, Yi Jifan, who had been promoted so quickly because of the jade pendant, felt uneasy. He always felt that the person behind him could push him up and throw him down. He couldn't help but wonder if the person behind him was a high-ranking official in the capital. Old Madam Yi was so angry that she almost smashed the microphone. However, she couldn't do anything about Yi Jifan. After all, her family needed his help. I hear you throwing a tantrum every day. Can't you have some peace and quiet? Old Man Yi, who was sitting outside, had his hands behind his back. He bent over and entered the room. His old voice was dry as he gasped for breath. When you brought him home, you should have known that he wasn't your biological son and that he wouldn't grow up well. Old Madam Yi, who didn't have to worry about not having a son, gritted her teeth and said hatefully, "If you hadn't urged me, I wouldn't have had to bring back an ungrateful brat." "Then do you think this son has grown up well?" Old Man Yi replied indifferently. Then, he put his hands behind his back and left with a carefree look on his face. He couldn't make the decision for his family. If he continued to talk about it, he would only embarrass himself. Old Madam Yi, who had been angry for a few times, felt her heart clench in pain. She was angry, but she didn't lose her mind. Since Yi Jifan was determined to transfer Yi Qian's household register back, for the sake of their future cooperation, this matter had to be done properly. When her daughter and son-in-law came back, she had to make a trip to the provincial capital. She had to personally go to the provincial capital to look for Yi Qian. She wanted to see if he dared to be unfilial to his elders in front of the school's leaders. Yi Qian, who was sitting in the school, didn't expect old Madam Yi to personally look for him. The next day, during the Lantern Festival, he happily called back to the village to talk to Uncle Jen and Principal Chin. Someone from the army also came. A basic officer brought 2 soldiers to deliver glutinous rice balls and medicinal wine to rub the legs. There was also a military doctor accompanying them. Yi Qian's call was very coincidental. The officer had just finished examining Principal Chen's body. Yi Qian felt relieved when he saw soldiers from the troops stationed at Fujian town coming over. They come to visit me every half a month. They help me clean up and tidy up my room. Occasionally, I go to the army to guide them. When I'm old, sometimes I don't feel like moving. Just sitting quietly at home feels good. Looking at the busy figure in military green, Uncle Jen laughed and said to Yi Qian, "When the time comes, I'll hand over this house and the secret passage that leads to the army to your Uncle Chin." The huge cave behind the mountain that led to the army was dug during the anti-Japanese war. Later on, the garrison troops kept expanding the cave until it reached its current size. If Yi Qian's mother was right, she would be the one guarding the connection between the army and the village. Yi Qian smiled happily and said, "You also have to see if Uncle Chin is willing. If Uncle Chin is willing to sit with you in the village when the time comes, that would be great." He conveyed her words to Principal Chin. After a while, he laughed and said, "Little Jian, Shuka village is such a good place. Even if you didn't say anything, I would still want to live there. In about 100 days, I'll go back to the village to accompany my old uncle. I'll also go to the army once in a while. That's enough for me." Chapter 11-13. Principal Chen, who was in his 50s, had been through the same war and had a lot to talk about with Uncle General. If the 2 elders could live in the same place, Yi Qian would be relieved. Regarding this, Uncle Jen agreed wholeheartedly. The soldiers who came to visit Uncle Jen never showed up in front of the villagers. The villagers were used to Uncle Jen celebrating the Lantern Festival alone. On the Lantern Festival, Uncle Jen, Headmaster Chin, and several officials in the army celebrated a lively festival. Principal Chin left Shuka village before dawn on the 16th day of the first lunar month. Uncle Jen, who was sending him off, reminded him, "Remember, don't tell anyone that Yi Qian's wife is back. I have Hei Jie with me, and normal people don't dare to break into our house." Before dawn, Uncle Jen, who had sent Headmaster Chin out of the village, was smoking a pipe and laughing. I live in peace and quiet by myself. I have Hey-Ga with me, and normal people don't dare to break into our house. Hey-Ga, the Tibetan Mastiff that put its forelimbs on Yi Qian's shoulder when they first met, was now an adult. It was even more majestic now, and people in the village didn't dare to get close to it. Sun Yaozu and old Madame Yi didn't know that Uncle Jen had a Tibetan Mastiff by his side. When they found out later, they were so scared that cold sweat broke out on their backs. The mountain village was obviously much colder than the provincial capital. When they arrived at the entrance of the village, Principal Chin didn't want Uncle Jen to send him off anymore. "Uncle, you don't have to send me off. Yesterday, the military doctor told you to keep your legs warm. When Miss Jian is admitted to school, I will come back to the village to accompany you." Principal Chin, who was all alone, had a similar life as Uncle General. He had no parents, no siblings, and no daughter of his own. The two elders had poured their life's efforts into Yi Qian. Now that Yi Qian needed to go on a long journey, they were relieved to let their young eagle fly and enjoy their old age. "I will wait for you to come back. When you come back, we can go for a walk in the mountains and the fields. We can also wait for Miss Jian's call." Principal Chen laughed heartily. "Soon. It's March 2nd now. There are still 100 days before Miss Jian's college entrance examination. I'll invite you to go fishing then." It was early spring and everything was still waiting to wake up. Principal Chin brought the dry goods from the village back to the provincial capital. Yi Qian had been waiting for Principal Chin to return. When he learned that Uncle Jen was in good health, the smile on his jade-like face was as clear and bright as the gurgling water in a mountain stream. "Uncle Chin, can I go back to the village on May 1st? I want to go back and take a look. I haven't been back for a few years. I miss home." Even if she wanted to go back, she couldn't make the decision on her own. Now that she had entered the special skills training, there was a training schedule every day that couldn't be interrupted. If she really wanted to go back, she had to prepare. If it was in the past, Principal Chin would definitely agree, but with Uncle Jen's order, he couldn't. He smiled and said, "You're making it difficult for me. Before I came back, I had to persuade you to prepare for the college entrance examination and not worry about him. If you really want to go back, you can only wait until the college entrance examination is over and bring the college entrance examination score back to see him. Uncle is in good health. You know Hey-Ga, right? That guy is fierce and intelligent. With him guarding Uncle Jen can rest assured." That was true. Heige was indeed the best guard. Yi Qian didn't mention returning to Shuku village anymore. However, he would call back every 3 days to ask about Uncle General. Uncle Jen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. On May 1st, there were 7 days of holiday. Yi Qian carried his luggage and went through a week of escape from death training. Chapter 11-14. The reason Yi Qian was called Escape by the Skin of Death training. The difference between this training and the previous 15 days of outdoor survival training was that there was no water or dry food. Yi Qian would be placed in a ravine and her food supply would be completely cut off. She would have to figure out a way to survive. This week, Yi Qian would probably have to eat a lot of things. For example, she would have to eat vegetarian food such as roots and tree bark. For meat, she would have to eat rats and birds. No fire, no cooked food, no water, no raw meat, and no raw food for a week. This type of training was called Escape by the Skin of Death training. Not only did Yi Qian have to survive being cut off from food, but she also had to submit a detailed military map. At the same time, she had to use sand, mud, and other materials to recreate the ravine she had walked through based on her memory. You must not lose the GPS tracker. Your phone has 3 batteries. Keep it well. Before entering the ravine, Principal Chin only gave a few words of advice before letting Yi Qian enter the mountains alone to begin the week-long Escape by the Skin of Death training. Yi Qian finished checking the necessary supplies and confirmed that there were no omissions. Once again, she embarked on the training alone. With the 15 days of survival training during the winter break, Yi Qian appeared to be more experienced this time. She did not immediately rush to travel. Instead, she climbed up a tree to observe the terrain and then decided on a route based on the terrain. The weather in May was just right. Green mountains and beautiful rivers filled the eyes. Just looking at the scenery made one feel comfortable. The mountain breeze carried the fragrance of flowers, making one's heart feel even brighter and brighter. Sitting on a tree branch, Yi Qian held a pen in her hand and quickly drew the direction of the entire ravine on a map. Which side was higher, which side was shallower, which side was thicker, which side was thinner, and which side was thinner. She used simple diagrams to draw out all the landmarks. After that, Yi Qian packed up her things and came down from the tree. She moved. Looks like she was observing just now. As the red dot on the computer monitor began to flash forward, the data was directly sent to the military headquarters. Xia Jinyuan, who was sitting in front of the computer, pointed at the moving red dot and said to the Major General with a smile, "She must have been drawing just now. Drawing before moving, observing before moving. This is in line with her combat style." The Major General, who had stayed up all night, drank 2 sips of strong tea to refresh himself. He glanced at the flashing red dot that showed an irregular oval wavy line and asked with interest, "It seems like you know Yi Qian quite well. You also have a high opinion of her. Do you really plan to recruit her into the unit?" "Major General, don't tell me you don't believe in your own eyes." Xia Jinyuan drank the bitter coffee that had already turned cold. He had also stayed up all night, but his elegant and handsome face showed no signs of tiredness. He smiled and said, "If you don't believe in your own judgment, then I have nothing to say." In the face of a subordinate who could make others choke with anger every time they talked, the Major General said unhappily, "Do you still want to talk about it? Do you want to go from Major to Lieutenant Colonel for another 4 years? As long as it's the military's arrangement, I have no objections at all. Come, Chief. Why don't we talk about Yi Qian first? Her matter is important. My matter is obvious. The military will know whether to mention it or not. It's not up to you to decide." Major Xia never cared about useless threats. Right now, Little Fox's future was the most important thing. The Major General knew what kind of personality he had. The more you went against him, the more he would go against you. Hearing this, he restrained his expression and said sternly, "The military hasn't made a decision on whether to put her in the position of Phoenix King. We still need to further investigate. Even you were investigated for 3 years before the military agreed. It's the same for Yi Qian. 3 years of military academy life will be carried out according to the Special Forces training plan. Whether or not she can sit in the position of Q King, Yi Qian will have to prove it with her own strength." Chapter 11-15. Xia Jinyuan naturally hoped that Yi Qian would be able to complete all the training the military gave her. Hearing this, he smiled and said, "Major General, you have to take care of female soldiers more. I've been in the military since I was a child and followed my father everywhere. I know a little about the Army's weapons, the Air Force's equipment, and the Navy's big guys. After entering the school, there's systematic training, so I can learn faster than other students. Yi Qian is different. She hasn't been exposed to the military's equipment and weapons. Since you intend to train her in our direction, you should at least open the door for her." Yi Qian couldn't miss out on any of the necessary training. However, Xia Jinyuan would also fight for some training or guidance in the military that Yi Qian might not be able to participate in. He hoped that she would know more and knew that she would be willing to learn more. Now that the Major General and the military were more and more satisfied with Yi Qian, he had to give some suggestions to prevent the military from only arranging for Yi Qian to train hard and leaving the technical training for last. Door for convenience. Yi Qian's ability is enough to create a path for herself. Why should I open the door for her? The Major General still didn't understand what Xia Jinyuan meant. He frowned and looked dignified without being angry. No one in your team has opened the door for convenience and climbed up with their own abilities. I'm going to open the door for Yi Qian today. Soon, I'm afraid that she will be carried down from the battlefield by you guys. Xia Jinyuan didn't mention that the Major General had misunderstood his meaning. Instead, he went along with his words. In the blink of an eye, the smile on his handsome face instantly turned cold. He said in a deep voice, "You're right. If she doesn't train properly, not only will she lose her life, she will also drag her comrades down. A soldier with unlimited potential like Yi Qian needs to be trained properly. She might even be able to save the entire battle at a critical moment. Therefore, I suggest that after her college entrance exam results are released, we should arrange for technical training and special training to be carried out together. The Navy has a month of frogman training from July to August. Why don't you arrange for her to test the waters with the Navy commandos after the exam? Let Yi Qian have a go at sea rescue, naval assault, underwater training, and so on." Xia Jinyuan's expression was extremely serious, and there was a hint of sharpness in his expression. The Major General did not suspect that Xia Jinyuan had any personal motives at all. Instead, he nodded in agreement. "You're right. It just so happens that it's the Navy frogman training in the Southwest Sea. We can let Yi Qian go there a week in advance to warm up and let the person in charge of this training get to know him better. Only after we have a certain understanding of the situation can we decide whether to allow Yi Qian to complete the 1-month training with the Navy commandos. However, this kind of training is not as easy as training on land. If he really goes to the Navy, they will also conduct a comprehensive test on Yi Qian's condition. The Snowfield Brigade was different from other special forces. This was a comprehensive combat force. The special forces of the Snowfield Brigade needed to know how to fly in the sky, run on land, and swim in the sea. In particular, they needed to be familiar with transport equipment and special equipment. Xia Jinyuan had complete confidence in Yi Qian's physical fitness and ability to accept the training. Since that was the case, he arranged all the training that she had to go through according to the military training so that she could enter the next round of training as soon as possible without any accidents. Holding her hand and walking together was not an empty promise. Xia Jinyuan had always kept it in mind and had never forgotten it. Chapter 11:16. He didn't have any objections to the Major General's words. After listening quietly, he added, "These are all essential training. I dragged it out until my 2nd year in the military academy. Of course, I can't say that the military didn't arrange it well. The main reason was that I went to the Air Force Base to play for more than a month after the college entrance exam. Now that Yi Qian is in the middle of the Navy's frogman training, the military has high expectations for her. She can definitely go with the Navy to test the waters and learn a little. In the future, she will participate in the Special Forces training of the sea, land, and air forces every year. She still has 1 year to study in the 4 years of military school. There were still 4 years left. It was enough time for Little Fox to become an outstanding Special Forces soldier. He would wait patiently for that day to come. The Major General took his words to heart. "You're right. We do need to bring up her training plan. The intensive training the military has arranged for her needs to be modified. He walked to the computer and saw the little red dot on the line moving forward. He narrowed his eyes and stared at the red dot. He asked Xia Jinyuan, "We only arranged a team of 7 people to ambush her during her survival training. Why don't we add more people? Give her a good test, and then submit her training report as a case to the Navy." "Major General, your arrangement is a bit sudden." Xia Jinyuan raised his eyebrows. It sounded like he disagreed, but there was a hint of interest in his handsome face. If one small team was not enough, they could arrange for another small team to go over. Then there would be 14 of them. Interesting. If the little fox really made it out of the survival training where she had to fight against 14 people at once, then the assessment of whether or not she could enter Lord Shuiyu would probably stop. And then she heard him say with a laugh, "If you really want to arrange it, you have to pick the right people. From the beginning of the training, Uncle Chen has been preparing ambushes. I have cooperated with her several times. Her reaction is very fast. Previously, she was ambushed under known circumstances, but this time, we arranged for her without any warning. Even old Qin didn't know about it. This kind of ambush is interesting. But..." The Major General paused when he thought of Soldier King's strength and said thoughtfully, "You reminded me that Yi Qian, who was trained by Soldier King, would not be weak in this aspect. Indeed, we have to be selective." Xia Jinyuan couldn't wait for the Major General to do more to get the Navy to agree to Yi Qian's frogman training this July. He picked up his landline and handed it to the Major General. "I have no objections to your arrangement. Of course, if you have any instructions, I'll listen to you immediately." What he meant was, "I can immediately bring my men over to ambush Yi Qian. Go, go, go. You'd better be obedient tomorrow. The military will officially take over Yi Qian's affairs. Don't get involved." The Major General took the phone in his hand and called Nan Province's provincial military. How strong one's strength was, could be seen through the tests again and again. This time, without any water or food, if Yi Qian could still escape her pursuer's search and ambush, then there was no need to prove her individual strength. Send another team of 7 people to Langshan Ravine in Mount Daolong to search for a female soldier. If they can't find her within 3 days, withdraw. The Major General gave the order to the provincial military in front of Xia Jinyuan. This was the military's first assessment of Yi Qian's individual strength. It was suddenly carried out without Principal Chen's knowledge. Moreover, the number of people increased from the original 7 to 14. In terms of numbers, Yi Qian was at a disadvantage. Chapter 11:17. In addition, the other party had brought their own rations, so there was no need for Yi Qian to find her own food. In terms of survival, Yi Qian was at a disadvantage. Most importantly, she had no idea that the military was involved in this escape from death training. She even sent people over. Yi Qian, who did not have much of a burden in her heart, walked for a day in the mountains that stretched for thousands of miles. After 10 hours of walking, she began to prepare for tonight's dinner. It was not yet summer, so the temperature in the mountains of Mount Daolong was still low. Yi Qian stood in the stream and prepared for tonight's dinner, eating stone crabs from the cracks in the rocks. On the first day of walking, she ate grass roots, which were very sweet and had good moisture. She also tried tree bark, which was bitter and dry. The fiber was so thick that it cut her throat. She had not eaten any rats or snakes yet. If she needed to replenish her salt and iron, she would have to eat them. Yi Qian did not think that this escape from death training with no food would be a problem. Just like survival in the wild, it was much easier than the previous 15 days. After eating about 10 stone crabs the size of beer caps, Yi Qian could not eat anymore. Before the sky turned dark, Yi Qian wiped away her traces and found a place to rest for the night. A nameless tree that grew out of the cracks in the rocks. She was the only one in the mountains. The wind blew, bringing with it the sound of leaves rustling. Yi Qian climbed up the tree nimbly, tied her backpack tightly, and rested her head on it to rest for the night. The wind was very strong, and the temperature dropped by around 10 at night. Several dark figures passed through the darkness and headed straight south. These were the soldiers sent by the provincial military. One team needed to chase after the female soldiers they were chasing, and the other team needed to go to the front to carry out an ambush. If they couldn't catch the female soldiers in training within 3 days, they would withdraw. They would be dismissed as a failure. It was a bit embarrassing that 14 people could not capture a single female soldier. However, it was said that the female soldiers they were chasing were different from ordinary female soldiers. During the pursuit, they could not treat them as ordinary female soldiers. They had to be more vigilant. Cut in from here. The two of you set up an ambush. Remember, you can only capture him alive. The sky was just beginning to brighten when a team of 7 arrived in front of Yi Qian. The team leader was the one who ordered them to take action. Wait until the target enters your line of sight. Don't rush into action. These female soldiers aren't simple. We have to be careful. Rest for 2 hours and take turns to be on guard. The leader of the team confirmed the deployment plan again and asked the soldiers to remember the checkpoint they were guarding. He waved his hand and told them to rest for 2 hours. Tomorrow, they would arrive at the mountainous area at 10 in the morning. After that, they would head into the mountains and march for 16 hours straight. Now, it was 3 in the morning, so they could sleep until 5 in the morning to replenish their energy. It was not very quiet in the mountains at night. The chirping of the insects did not stop for a moment, but it was not noisy. Instead, it was like a lullaby, and Yi Qian soon fell asleep. Even with the lullaby in her ears, she couldn't stay in a deep sleep. Without someone on guard, no matter how solid the environment was, her heart wouldn't be at ease. In addition, she had been eating raw food all day. After sleeping until 2 in the morning, Yi Qian woke up hungry. She had entered the period of hunger, and this would happen every day. Yi Qian woke up again at dawn. She scooped some cold water from the stream to clear her mind. Under the faint sunlight, Yi Qian looked at the compass, opened the map, and marked it with a pen. She murmured softly, "It's a bit of a detour to follow the stream from here. It's a bit steep to cut this way." Chapter 11:18. That won't do either. It's a waste of time even if it's steep. Even though it's a bit of a detour along the mountain stream, I can still make up for the time lost if I walk faster. After planning the next day's itinerary, Yi Qian began to draw a map of the terrain that he saw. As part of his training, he couldn't forget it. In order to replenish his protein and prevent his hunger from affecting his movements, Yi Qian caught a non-venomous snake that was in estrus and made it for his breakfast. The earthy taste filled his mouth. Raw meat tasted bad, but as long as it could replenish his protein and energy, and drive away his hunger, he could swallow it down after a few bites. As for parasites, they weren't even in his consideration. That was why he had so much time to think about these and other things. When it came to survival, there was only one thing that he had to think about: filling his stomach. Spring was warm and the flowers were blooming. From late April to early May, the snakes were in their estrus period. Early in the morning, Yi Qian saw the male and female snakes making clear and bright sounds that sounded like they were hitting rocks. When he looked up, he could see the snakes entwined together on the branches. When he looked down, he could also see them in the cracks of the rocks. Faced with these scalp-numbing snakes, Yi Qian's gaze swept over them and fell on the abnormally broken branches. The creases were very fresh, and there were still wet twigs that had condensed into milky white beads. Yi Qian broke the same branches and observed whether the twigs condensed into beads faster or slower. After 5 minutes, there was still no twigs. Yi Qian looked up to the south. Someone had passed by last night, and it looked like they were heading in the direction of the mountain stream that she had chosen. It was normal for people to pass by in the mountains. Some were secretly hunting, and some were villagers who went to the highest peak of Mount Daolong to dig for herbs. Anything was possible. However, the traces that they left behind would not be deliberately erased. If they walked past, they walked past. If they stepped on it, they stepped on it. There was no such thing as erasing the traces. Experienced poachers would usually erase the traces they left behind in order to cover their tracks. However, there weren't any rare animals in Mount Daolong. There were only small animals like pheasants and rabbits, so it wasn't worth it for people to risk their lives to hunt in the middle of the night. Villagers who didn't dig herbs, hunters who didn't hunt, after eliminating those who weren't dangerous, the only ones left were those who were dangerous. Yi Qian's gaze turned cold. He held the dagger in his hand and continued walking south along the stream. Is it possible that he didn't take this path? I didn't see any traces along the way. Firstly, I didn't bring any water. Secondly, I didn't bring any food. Even if you're looking for food, you should leave some traces. About 5 kilometers away from Yi Qian, a few soldiers in jungle camouflage passed through the mountains. They stepped on the green moss as they searched for the correct location. Reporting, Captain Xiao, we didn't find anything here. Captain Xiao, did she go in the wrong direction? Lost your way in the mountains. Team B arrived at one of Yi Qian's training destinations, but they did not find any traces of her in this area, so they were suspicious. Captain Xiao was also a little puzzled. Logically speaking, there should be traces left behind by her. He turned to his comrades and said, "Go to the stream and search again." If the female soldier was lost, they definitely had to find her. However, he was afraid that the female soldier wasn't lost. It was them who couldn't find her. "Yes, sir." A few voices sounded in unison. They quickly spread out to search by the stream. After searching for about 10 minutes, Captain Xiao contacted the provincial military and reported their situation one by one. "Commander, we searched the place where she rested last night but didn't find any traces. Do you think it's possible that no one came here?" You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.